didn't record. We just watched the how wolves change rivers. Monbiot narrated piece. There's a lovely one that goes with that called "More Whales Each Whales Make More Fish." Again, a similar sort of interesting exploration of how one species can drive a whole ecosystem. Something that George calls a trophic cascade. So we've thought a lot about how the phytoplankton feeds the zooplankton, which sort of creates a sort of build up from the bottom. But as ecosystems start to reach their sort of their peak, if we get more higher up species, those species then seem to be the drivers of the system and energize the whole system. So so it builds from the bottom up, but also then it's sort of driven from the top down. It's very interesting. We are very interested in rebuilding ecosystems, rebuilding social systems and community systems as well, because in certain ways, the inputs and outputs of connection within a community are very similar to those within ecosystem. So we are not so different. And as ecosystems engineers, perhaps within sort of our permaculture mindset we might think about how we might approach that. As I said before, as we're looking for a leverage point, where's the thing that we can do? What's the thing that we can do that's the smallest intervention that creates the biggest sort of desired effect? And we're seeing there that the intervention in Yellowstone was to allow a small pack of wolves in and to observe how they their behaviors affected every other element in the system. And as we heard from George, they completely transformed things. So again, George goes on in Feral and other sort of works of his, is to realize that the ecosystem in many places, especially the UK, is very broken because there's so many elements that would have been there are missing, beavers being one of them. They've been tentatively reintroduced into some areas, but how about lynx? How about wolves themselves? If you go back far enough, there used to be elephants and hippos in our climate too. And so some of the sort of the breakdown or the sort of the way that our ecosystems behave in a sort of slightly dysfunctional way can be in part explained by the fact that there are key species missing. And that kind of leads us into the rewilding kind of line of thinking. Now we'll come back to that because obviously it's a super interesting area. I'm going to move us into a social area and talk about people and stuff in this first presentation. And I want to talk about a council estate. It's actually a large housing association run. And it used to be called, and it's just, it's Liverpool. It's between Liverpool and Knowsley. And it used to be known as Cantrell Farm. If anybody remembers the TV show Brookside, it was pretty much filmed around there. Cantrell Farm was one of those estates that they built in the late 60s. They were clearing sort of tenement slums in central Liverpool, and had the idea of creating a sort of a satellite town outside on the edge, where people could live together in a designed community, I suppose. We've got there's about 7,000 people living there. As you can see, there's a series of tower blocks, each one with 96 residents, 96 flats. One of these flats was so out of control, the drug dealing and what have you, that had by the sort of 90s, early 90s, that the intervention that they made was to pull it down, just to get rid of the tenants. Whilst I was there, these buildings were being cladded in external thermal insulation. I thought, fantastic, I'm very happy to see that, improving the quality and the thermal quality of these buildings. Now, I don't know what the quality of this cladding was, and obviously once we saw Grenfell, it was absolutely appalling to consider how authorities might try and save a bit of money by using substandard materials. I digress, but so the Stockbridge Village is typified by very high unemployment. It's one of those places that when you live there, if your circumstances improve, you're quite likely to leave. So it's a little bit of a sink, I think we could say. What I was surprised also was to see, even for people in their 50s, how many people had health problems. When I say even, that's not really super old, and you see people coming out of the pharmacy with sort of, carrier bags full of stuff. People quite overweight, probably a higher incidence of smoking and drinking, yeah. Anyway, so there's an organisation in Toxteth called Squash Nutrition, and they invited me to come along and to work with them in Stockbridge over the course of a couple of years to try and engage and interact with the community to improve nutrition. Really was the outer goal. How to do that was by engaging people in growing and having slight empathy with growing of plants, and also valuing some of the plants and things on the estate. Cooking, because very few people actually cooked properly, and demonstrating that, and kind of a socializing inclusive process, really similar to what we were doing at Cultivate, but in a slightly different setting. So firstly, perhaps you could say, is you need to go to the people. You need to be in a place that's accessible to create an overlap space, if you like, where the community can, where there is a genuine community interaction. This is the little shopping precinct in Stockbridge, and what we have here was a pharmacy down the bottom, and see people coming and getting really massive prescriptions. Post office, a news agent that doesn't sell the Sun because it's Liverpool, a tanning salon, bargain booze, office for the construction company that runs the estate, and then us next to the chip shop. So we're kind of stuck between Chinese fish and chip shop and bargain booze. Bargain booze opened at 11 a.m. and at 10:45 there were often a queue outside. I was a little bit shocked to see that. But here we are, a village farm hub, and the idea was to okay, so town councils, urban councils often don't like to see empty shops. If there's a sort of several in an arcade, they'll really look for things to put in them to to not make the place look like it's failing. So Squash Nutrition had negotiated a sort of relatively soft deal to have a shop, the pop in to the drop in. Lovely, round the back. It's one of those places where you do have to keep an eye on safety and security. Obviously, a lot of drug issues there historically. I think the situation was improving, but you see a lot of guys on mountain bikes with kind of facial coverings and whizzing around doing deliveries. So probably that was what that was about. So here we are in amongst a very urban, quite distressed landscape, trying to do something positive, trying to bring some permaculture here. How do you even do that? Fair question, right? And learning how to engage with people who are, just really many of these things are totally new ideas. And in fact, I was really surprised how little ownership people had of the estate. I had this sort of slightly, I suppose, Coronation Street type impression that people who live in high density housing are all kind of buddies and they all know each other and will have a pint together at the end of the day in the Rovers Return or whatever, which of course they don't. And they mainly don't know each other, I found, and that people were I felt really alienated walking around here, and quickly discovered that so did many of the people that we worked with too. Anyway, so you want to remove any barriers that there might be for people to come in and like sort of coming to them, And I quickly realized this, I couldn't have fixed times and be overly formal or do long rambling lectures. You've got to be short and sharp. You've got to find ways to get a connection to people very quickly, and to try and build on it. So again, once you've established some kind of a contact, then the chance then is to build on it. So it's not all tower blocks. It's not all high rises. That was sort of the first impression you get. But there's a lot of high density housing too, and this is very typical. So in the 60s, in the late 60s, early 70s, there was an idea, in some ways quite a good idea, but it failed horribly, which was of creating, it was like a periphery road around the outside and roads that came in for sort of parking and access. But it was the idea that it would be a walking, an open place, lots of green. So although we've got high density housing, we've got huge green spaces in between. In fact, acres and acres, I can't remember now, they told me how much, it was something like 15 acres of space within these high density settlements. And what was clear immediately was that people had no connection to those spaces. Here's a really typical sort of thoroughfare, lots of walking and cycling. Look how the gates have all got, there's a lot of bars and fencing and narrowed gates and things like that there, which, let me just go back to the map. It doesn't sort of show very well, but you see lots of dead end roads coming into the centres, the leisure centre. Where even was the shopping centres here somewhere, right where it says Stockbridge, I think. And so what happened was that in the bad old days, is people would be chased by the police. They'd come ripping through the estate on stolen bikes and motorbikes and things, and the police couldn't chase them. So they started narrowing the edges and putting barriers everywhere so that you can't get from one part of the estate to the other. So they kind of negated all of the ideas of it being an open, inclusive space by trying to damp down the sort of crime effect. In this building here, and again, this was a kind of quite a learning for me. Was the number of damaged people that are within these communities. So this here is a hostel for single guys, mainly divorcees, and mainly with struggling, mental health problems, a lot of alcohol, maybe history of substances, who knows, but and again, that doesn't play out well when you get to your 50s and 60s and people start seizing up and becoming quite negative in their outlooks and stuff like that. So multiple sort of layers of challenges, but multiple layers of opportunities, because there's not much going on there to really, of excitement, of interest. The management plan for the land is mow it every 8 days, so that the grass doesn't get too long. So then you don't have to do composting. You don't have to collect the grass. You can just dump it back onto as the mowings, because it never gets too long. Plus, also, if you do that fairly regularly, you kind of pick up the crisp packets and the dog turds and stop it from becoming too unsightly. So really a lot of litter blowing around, really noticing all the edges and hedges were sort of full of crisp packets, and there's little plastic chip forks. Those things seem to get everywhere. It's really noticeable what things that seem to be, really everywhere. Anyway, so you can see, and then, there's my same car. You can also realize. Also, I started thinking a lot about these spaces. I don't quite know what to call them. And anyway, yeah. What do I just think his name? Call them edges. Oh, they're edges there, and there are spaces that really don't have a function. I suppose you can't plant things like this up as a forest garden because it's a sight line. So when you're coming around the corner, you need to see. So I was really staggered and struck by how much green space there was, how much it wasn't interacted with, how it was just mowed, and really that to me just felt like a waste of energy or a lot of effort going into to try and keep something the same without having any yield from it. as I say, people didn't interact with these spaces. They weren't running around with a dog or playing ball or whatever it is you do on a big lawn. And so the vision was, can we engage the population? Can we get them out onto the greens? Can we plant trees and create pocket forest gardens, little micro green areas that not imposed, because that wouldn't work. Can we stimulate the community for them to, to engage with these things? And the map below, this was the people from within Squash Nutrition were very good with art, and very good at sort of public art and public engagement, and that was kind of outside of my thinking and experience. I thought that was very interesting. So anything that they publish, this is like a leaflet or something, they've used artwork which was captured from sessions that I was doing in the shop. So one of the early days, we walked around. It was quite a nice autumn day, so we walked around the estate and we picked hips and haws and leaves and berries and what have you, and we took them back to the to our little base, our little project base in the shopping centre, and we drew them. And I hadn't thought that much about it. We put them a few up on the wall. And next week I came down, and obviously they'd scan them all in and use them in artwork for the project. And many of these sort of themes and motifs started popping up again more and more around the project. So they were very good at recycling output, and very good at using the work of course participants to make them feel included, to make them feel valued and part of it. So I felt I learned a lot from this. And in many, the frustration was 2 years into this, I felt like we were starting to really make some purchase. We were starting to really get in. And that was when it ran out of funding, and they couldn't afford to import me, have me go up there I can't remember, I was going up for 2-3 days every other week, something like that, and go and spend a night or two over in Liverpool. They gave me a little area to work from, my little base, my little zone 1, polytunnel, and one of our raised beds, which I persuaded them to purchase. And this is the bounty of the estate. This is the raw material that they have. It's wood chip and compost. It was a Knowsley, I think, Borough Council compost, which I could get hold of that quite easily if I spoke to the right person. And there's nearly always a lot of wood chip in towns and suburbs because they're clearing overhead lines and stuff like that. So that was and this is in the service area behind the shops, where all of those, the chip shop and the betting shops and stuff are. And so it had a degree of protection because it's sort of within some spiky railings and a sort of a regulated area. So what was the at first I didn't really know what I was doing, but I guess none of us really did, but it was we just started germinating things and whatever we could, and engaging with people to, I don't know, this was like the first magic moment, actually, this photo here, was when you could see people starting to interact, and when they had a common task, that made it very easy then for them to sort of feel that they were collaborating. And you say, again, it was the opposite of what I thought. I kind of imagined that everybody knew each other, and actually people were very isolated and suspicious of each other, not really wanting to open up because they're all stuck in this kind of goldfish bowl. So finding ways that weren't maybe too personal or too, dealing with your own inner stuff seemed to work. And because we're engaging people in doing things. One of these are Joster berry cuttings. One of the early things that I realized that we could do, especially because it was the autumn when I started, which was propagating things like currant bushes. And there's kind of a magic to that, because it's a simple thing that you're teaching people how to do. It's not particularly hard, and then once they've got it, they can repeat it many times, and you create loads of material. So again, simple tasks that people can then do kind of routinely, and then it brings them together. The integrate rather than segregate. How can we build a community by working together and creating overlaps between individuals. And then if you and I have worked together to create something, is that something now represents, you know, the thing, something that's unifying, hopefully, you know. So here we are. I would just go and cut loads of cuttings, grab stuff from Cultivate. I or go and walk around the estate and spot things and just be kind of, you know, just or constantly looking for improvising ways in which we could engage with people in little tasks. Again, look, we've got nice sort of informative posters and photos of any activities they've done up on the wall, anything that reinforces, you know, those behaviors and reinforces the feeling of unity, the feeling of the group. So by, I can't remember if it was the first spring or the second spring, probably the first spring now. So if I'd come in the autumn. And that was a great moment. Well, by the time we got to stage where we'd started to propagate lots of plants, you know, all these things that we'd created. The project had lots of budget for fruit trees. And our sort of goal was to create these little orchards and to get as many fruit trees in the ground. And, but I was interested in also building communities around the fruit trees, the sort of food forest idea of support plants and herbs and pollinators and things like that. And we had quite a lot of success doing that. And this chap, John here, he you know, in many ways typified people on the estate. He'd been a night watchman, had been his job, and he'd been assaulted and something bad had happened, and he'd spent 2 or 3 years recovering, and he'd sort of, you know, didn't really want to go out a lot, and it was already maybe quite a timid guy, quite a quiet guy, so that, you know, obviously had really dented his self-confidence and so forth. And he really found himself within this project. He was so very quiet, very shy kind of guy, but and all of this was new to him, but he found it fascinating. And I remember towards the end of this, he was going, well, I never imagined that I would be, you know, permaculture like that. You know, I didn't even know what that was 2 years ago. Eventually he did a PDC, came to Wales, and, you know, we tried to encourage him to go as far as he could with it. You can see some of our fruit trees here, waiting to probably just healed in, ready for planting. And then we're multiplying out lots of plants here. And again, the real output is the human connection. I wasn't ever really bothered about the plants, although obviously we tried to do as best we can. But that was a method, that was our way of engaging with people. And when we created loads of these plants, we could then, because we've made them from local resources, we could give them away. And do some wonderful characters, as I'm sure you can imagine. This is Tony Corden, I remember his name very well. Retired docker, granddad. I think his son and his grandson never worked, not yet. Sort of typical of that sort of place, you know. But he had some real, you know, whatever, really, a real character, to be honest. Anyway, so actually, this is an outreach in Toxteth. This was us doing a consultation in Toxteth, inviting a community to think about another community garden space, kind of cultivate type garden. That was another interesting sort of element to this project. And actually seeing how slowly squash nutrition and their work are starting to change parts of Liverpool quite significantly. Here we are. I can see what this sort of urban landscape is like. It's pretty damn bleak, to be honest, and especially working in the winter. That's the leisure centre, and this is where the bus stops. The bus turns around, and look, more and more housing everywhere around. This is right in front of the shopping arcade, and next to there is a supermarket. I can't remember what it was called, but I remember thinking at the time is that it kind of makes look quick save, look up market. You know, it was very, very cheap and cheerful, and very nasty, not very nice food. Anyway, so here we are planting a food forest. We've established some mulch on the grass. We're putting in a mix of trees and shrubs and stuff. And the guy with the hat on here growing, what he's saying is, it's not going to work, you know. Everyone just steal everything. It's just like, you know, And he'd turn up every week. He'd never miss a session. And he'd say to me, well, I'll just be sat at home staring at the wall, you know. I've got nothing else to do since the missus died. And then he'd be there working away going, it's not going to work, you know, it's all a waste of time. And then we were on that day and it's starting to rain, it's getting a bit cold. I was going, oh, let's go inside and get a cup of tea. He's going, no, we've got to finish. And I realised actually, it's like, he's really into it, you know, and they all were. The guy on the right, he used to suddenly burst into song and start singing some, I don't know, some ballad from another era. Beautiful. And the woman on the site, she was on the team as well. So I usually had someone to work with. And again, it's just gently find ways to engage people, to make them feel part of this project, which ultimately is part of this community. So there's that same garden some months later, and we've grown melons on it. And that particular project member, not melons, marrows. That particular project member, she'd never seen a marrow before. She said, I'm 42, and I didn't even know what this is called. And what was so cool though was that she picked the marrow, she cradled it in her arms like it was a baby, and we took it to the back to the centre, to the base, where they made marrow and ginger jam, and it was delicious. And then that was another step up for her to actually understand, to realise you could transform this vegetable into that amazing jam. So I don't know if you noticed that they had marrow and ginger jam at Trevlack Farm the other morning. I was delighted because it reminded me of that moment. So somehow, I'm not saying it was brilliant, it was like a runaway amazing success, because it wasn't, but this was our attempt. This was like base camp, if you like. It was our first little forest garden. And again, you've got to realize that when you first plant fruit trees, they don't look that fantastic. It takes a year or two for them to really establish in place. And we were warned to expect a lot of vandalism and theft, and that people generally, didn't instantly respect things. But in some ways, the sort of invisibility of some of what we were doing meant that, it's a creeper. Do you know what I mean? You don't notice it straight away, but quite a few had branches and things snapped off, just probably thoughtless people just walking past, not really understanding what they were doing. But it gave me real insights into pruning and what happens if you do it wrong slightly. So we were told to expect about a 25 or 30% success rate of what we planted, and we got something like an 80% success rate. So we were pleased. I was pleased with that. But again, it's about the human interactions, not the plants, really. And what you've got to find in each area is the keystone species. This is one of the things that I thought. And in this particular area of the estate, it's this lady here on the left. And she was the one who went, and when we were constantly saying, we didn't just turn up and plant the trees. We were always knocking on doors, trying to entice people into the centre and say, well, have you got a bit of land in front of your place that you'd like to put a tree? Perhaps we could put a tree to commemorate something, a lost pet or a granny or a happy moment or something, and a birth or I don't know. And this woman, she'd invited us up to their estate to say, yeah, we want to do that. And when we got there, of course, they hadn't really prepared for it in any way. And so she just went and knocked on loads of people's doors and just said, right, you're doing this, and got them all out. And it created a beautiful moment. It created a lovely, unique moment when we could begin a process. And I did go back 2-3 years ago to see, it's like 2013, 2014, I think a lot of this work was going on. I went back about 16 or 17, and some of the stuff I'd really taken, other stuff looked a bit neglected, but, I felt it needed another year of input. But there were definitely results. Excuse me. We did do stuff all over the estate. But we tried to create some sort of visible, noticeable bits in and around the shopping precinct, because that's obviously the crossroads point where everyone else was going. If you did it at the top of a cul-de-sac, was still totally valid, but you're going to reach fewer people. And especially in the early days of the project, we were trying to sort of, make people aware of perhaps there's something going on, or chance to be involved. Shave horses, working with hands, working with hand tools, processing a bit of wood, just using the weight of your body to hold it in place. Really, really powerful experience. And making things again a lot of this was sort of during and after sort of cultivate time. So I'd had a lot of lessons we'd learned about how we'd, say for example, building the roundhouse, had brought a community in, and we realized that often people didn't have such an empathy with growing and gardening. You could perhaps develop that in them, but you just had to find a way in. It didn't matter what it was. You just had to find that first connection and give them, mention you've got a drop-in center they could come to, and then then you've got, it's your first rung of the ladder, if you like, and that's always the hardest thing to achieve. Really, really is. Cooking sessions. The great thing about the cooking sessions was you make food, and so you then get to eat it and hand it out. The other project members were very good at, once we'd had anything we'd made, chop it all up into little bite-sized pieces, make it look really nice with a cocktail stick or a little cardboard cup of hot soup or something, and just go out and give it away. And if anybody responded with a degree of interest, say, oh, we've been making soup, would you like to try it? We've been making soup. Oh, it's a lovely recipe. Would you like the recipe? I have it here. We're having regular sessions in the drop-in center. Pop by next week. You only say, you can just sort of get a sense of whether someone's actually just scuttling away. They'll try to take the soup, but that's it. Whether that's the first sort of connection. And others, you can see they're genuinely interested. You don't want to kind of force your leaflets onto people who are genuinely not interested, because you'll kind of alienate them. So what was lovely, again, was whether we're propagating plants, which is what I was doing. I wasn't doing the cooking, but this was just happening on one of the days. Creates this really lovely convivial atmosphere, and all the chit chat can start happening, and people start joking at each other. And I can also say there were 2 or 3 guys that came every week, and that was the really, really hard thing, was making the first connection. And so one of them was that guy who was really bitterly cynical, but he came all the time anyway. And then one time he turned up with his grandson, and he wanted me to repeat some of the things that I'd said to him to the grandson, whether it was about something that was interesting, engaging, positive or something. And again, that's why I just got a sense of, okay, actually this is working. It's just very slow, and you're sort of creating overlaps and connections between people, and maybe these people are quite cautious and quite sort of contained, reserved, self-contained about how they might go. They don't just run headlong into things. But slowly, this is at a residential care home. There's again a lot of that for older people. And here we are planting a little fruit tree guild in the middle of the lawn. So again, as I realized that by clustering a few elements together, it's still easy for them to maintain, because they're going to mow it with a big mower probably. So keeping the maintenance plan in mind is a key part of it. And again, this is volunteers from the community. This lady is from one of the carers from inside the home, and even if it was just for a few minutes, they gave the people there something different to think about. And I hope they've enjoyed watching those trees develop and seen them sort of slowly change the landscape around. But just, again, there's sort of baby steps into the community. Okay, this guy on the right was called Neil. He was amazing. And once he started coming along, the energy changed on the project. He had a real can-do attitude. And his teeth were broken and falling out, and I don't know, like you could see everyone had really come from really distressed kind of lives, but this guy had a very positive attitude. And he was like, he came up to me, so use your I can't do a Scouse accent, so I'm gonna try, but he'd heard we were planting fruit trees around about the place. I said, yeah, if you've got an area in front of your house, you can have that, you can champion that tree. You can be, the guardian of that tree. He was going, excellent. He said, I've already levered up the paving stones outside my house. I'm ready. And I was like, oh, okay, that wasn't exactly what we had intended. And we got there, and he just literally, him and his mate had just levered up some of the slabs and thrown them into the hedge, and he wanted to plant this plum tree on there. So we did everything we can to sort of uncompact the soil a bit and feed it a bit and mulch it and care it, and got this plum tree in. So, again, and there's in the blue hat, there's the chap there who was always moaning about everything. Oh, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. We're all wasting our time, We'll all be dead soon anyway. But there he was working away. And we slowly built our little team, or some lovely interactions with kids some days. And we built our little team, and we found our way of doing it. Well, it was what we wanted, our simple pattern, our basic pattern. So whether we had a raised bed or not, this is outside the boxing club. This is a chance to add a little bit of diversity. So here we've got a 1.2 square meter raised bed. We've got some herbs and whatever it is, some lavender or something in there. Looks like some lemon balm, and we've got a plum tree. So we've got a little layered mini forest garden, if you like, a little plant guild right out there outside the boxing club. Soften the landscape, introduce the idea of eating fresh food, promoting the idea of growing some more of your own, and trying to sort of get ecosystem sort of ideas going. This is making apple chutney. We're very interested in trying to, do everything we can to get the best value you could out of the produce. This is we did a blind tasting, like wine tasting, but with apple juice. So Sainsbury's Basics apple juice and concentrate, Sainsbury's organic posh apple juice, a sort of intermediate one, and then the real stuff. And very, very interesting to see how people reacted to it. 9 people out of 10 actually liked the real stuff, but when you showed them, whatever. Interesting. So I'm just talking about possibilities, really, I think. And I wish I could say there was a massive happy ending to the story. And the truth is that we've just starting to really break in, and then the funding ended, so it kind of lost. But then, and the focus of the project moved then to Toxteth, to another part, where they have created a local food hub, and they have really built on this. So this was the outreach. This was really like out in the, in the wild areas. They'd sent me out to Stockbridge. But look, this woman here working here, she lived on the flat 96 on the top floor of this building. And she said there were mainly alcoholics in the building. It was pretty scary and all of that. But what it felt like for her to be gardening the area around it was really wonderful. And I put in some really what will become very big, substantial fruit trees there. And I realised that some of the softer, more delicate things that we were doing probably wouldn't survive. If we could get some really stonking M25 trees, or really strong vines and things like that, we could start to change some of the areas, and it is what we managed to do. And just to sort of get to the last 2 slides of this is this is our country, this is Britain, right? And there's something a little bit sad about that. So this is a high-rise flat. This is in this fairly bleak environment. And what you're seeing, that building behind there, is this building, and this is the day unit for kids who are one step away from prison. We get to go home at night, I think, but there's 2 layers of fences around the building. It's very much like prison. It's sort of training you to be in prison. And I just thought, well, if you're failing to accommodate people within community and society, and then you're labeling people as being problematic, ADHD or whatever it is, how people get labeled, and then you're into the system, and then you're getting referred to places like this, which is basically training you to be part of the excluded society, familiarizing yourself with what it's like to be in institutions. It kind of felt like it was training people for prison. I really did. And this was the bit where, this was how far we got, and this is sort of where the tide turned back when the project ran out. But I got some photos somewhere, but I actually got to design and plant a fruit forest in this area, between the external fence and the internal fence, because that was the degree of security that this place had. Obviously, we were allowed to bring the students or whatever into the space to work with us, and again, it seemed to me that there was an enormous possibility to channel this energy of the youth, of the older people, of the damaged people, to channel this energy into rebuilding community, and to do that in a very biological and permaculture way, but where the key thing that you're trying to achieve is the human cohesiveness, the cohesive community, the plants and the soil improvement and everything else. The removal of all the plastic chip forks is a kind of a byproduct of that process. And I think there's an enormous role, restorative role, that this kind of permaculture approach in the UK to, you know, to reach out and include these people back into society, to see that they can actually shape it rather than just be victims of it, actually shape it and feel included in it, and feel that they're creating something that maybe the next generation might enjoy more than this rather bleak place. So I left away with hope, and I felt that I'd learned a lot from this place. We'd certainly sowed a lot of seeds and a lot of trees, and but these things need to be continually invested in. I think. I don't think you just it's a 2-year project and then you can tick a box. I think you need to think about how can it be ongoing. And I would have really loved to have my community garden centre within this facility with the kids. I think I could have broken through some of the barriers that there might be quite quickly by finding ways to engage their energy usefully. So I started to think a lot about youth engagement and hand tools, building simple structures, using things like scythes, coppicing, biochar making as activities to engage with people. As I was interested, we're playing with fire, playing with sharp, long knives and stuff like that. I think all of that is really cool, and a way in, you know, and you're giving people hard skills. And even if they're not going to use the skills of biochar making in the workplace, they're going to use the skills of being a socialized, balanced person who can, you know, get on with other people and not see everything as a source of conflict. This was what was going on at the same time for us. Was we were doing we were reclaiming a yard in Llanidoes. It's the Welsh part of our project, there's one of the courses and training things that we were doing at Cymharu at the time. So this was there's one from 2013. So you can see how it's been, you know, these different elements fitted together, and it's had a chance for me to take the learning from Cymharu and do outreach, you know, take those ideas out into another place. That was a really fantastic experience. Yep. Okay. So there we go. There's the Stockbridge experience, but really, and I'm telling you about that, about integrate rather than segregate. How do we break down some of these walls and barriers in a way in which we can include people? It has to be inclusive. All of this, you're not good enough, and kicking people out of things has long-term ramifications. It really, really does. And yeah. So that was a very, very important experience for me. And I want this sort of links into this next presentation, which is about working with people. And I want to talk about people. And I want to talk about co-operatives within the integrate and segregate thing. Yeah, so seeing as we've just come to the end of something, I know it's only 5 to 10, but should we just have a 5-minute break? I could really do another cup of tea, and we'll start again at 10, so we'll have a 6-minute break. That's okay. I'll just pause for now. See you in 6 minutes. Okay. I can see you're there. I've got my tea. I'm happy now. You might, when you look in the Dropbox, you might notice that there is a film in there called The Power of Community. It's very, very inspiring, really wonderful thing. Quite old now, 10, 12 years old. Actually, probably older than that. But it's about Cuba and how, when the Soviet Union collapsed, how then the food system in Cuba kind of collapsed, because they didn't have a tradition of farming. It obviously been developed as Cuba being developed as a slave economy with export-led sugar cane mainly, and rum, and tobacco. And then as it become independent, and then people have then sort of worked on these huge plantations. So not much of a tradition of food growing. And then when the Soviet Union collapsed, all of their agricultural inputs, all of their oil-based commodities suddenly became really scarce or almost possible to get hold of. They had to redesign their whole economy, especially their food systems, to not be so reliant on oil. And at the time, everybody thought, interesting. They're probably going through the process that we're all going to have to go through in the future. And at that time, in the, let's say, 2007, 8, 9, 10, we were all very, very caught up with an idea called peak oil, which is still very much a thing, and which has been, I think, many ways explains much of what's happened in geopolitics since 2008. And it's based on the reality that oil is a physical resource. So to get out, it doesn't flow out of the ground like it does at the petrol pump. You have to continually invest huge amounts of money into geological surveys and explorations, and then drilling, and then pumping and storage and stuff like that. And all of that is incredibly investment heavy. And the returns on that investment doesn't come until many years down the line. And what's more is we've explored and developed the most easily available resources first. So as global demand is rising, actually the quality of the remaining resource is worse, is lower, and it costs much more money to develop. And at some point, that's going to break the industry. Now, what that forced them to do was, we saw the price spike very high in 2008, $140 odd a barrel, and then that triggered an investment into the next level of oil, which was the oil shales and tar sands and deep sea oil. Which is a lot of what's now got us into the trouble that we're in, because a lot of those things are not very profitable. So its debt has ballooned, and we've seen the sort of the oil companies kind of really exert their power over the whole political system to try and keep. Hello, can you hear me? For a moment, it just dropped out for a second.
Yeah, I got you back now. You did drop out.
Okay, not sure what happened there.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back. Right, what was I doing? Screen share. People. Go. Okay, so we're back. Right, okay, so we're going to talk about working with people, and what I'm talking about is moving away from this massive dependence on oil, and understanding perhaps how we've given so much power to the oil industry that it's now warped our economic and political processes. Some people say, this talk is called Permaculture, Design, Working with People. People are the ultimate resource. Some people say there are too many people. If we are all to live like the top 20%, then there's too many people. If we all want to live an oil-based consumerist lifestyle, then it's not going to work. I put this graph in Small and Slow Solutions on the page about population that says, let's talk about population. And what it says is that, it's very clear, these are figures from Oxfam, we've all known this a long time, but that 49% of all of the emissions on the planet come from 10% of the people. And that's you and me, folks. The next 10% are responsible for 19% of the emissions. So that's 20% of the people are responsible for 70% of the emissions. And the poorest 10%, the poorest, 50% of all the people in the world are responsible for 10% of emissions. So when we say there's too many people, what we mean is there's too many people living out these kinds of lifestyles. We can't all live. In fact, none of us, we can't continue to live like this. I think if we look at the top 1%, I think then they're responsible for, I don't know, some really hugely disproportionate amount of emissions. Now, maybe the top 1% are now responsible for something equal to the bottom 40%. So the answer is, it's not a numbers game. Maybe, who says 7 billion people's too much? It's certainly 2 billion people's too much if we live like this. If we got rid of all of the poor people in the world, we'd still, this is it. We got rid of 50% of all the people on the planet, and they were the poor people, then we'd still be in a climate crisis. It wouldn't make any difference. Our emissions would go down by 10%, and that would quickly be taken up by more people with private jet planes. So it's a complete and total misunderstanding of the problem. Again, it's like the oil industries have tried to blame us individually for climate change. Oh, think about your personal footprint. Think about your own choices. No, let's think about the economic system that takes away our choices. That's the problem. We can definitely solve this problem, but it's going to take all of us. It has to be inclusive. So my argument, my statement really is okay, how do we involve everybody? And then maybe if we can involve at least the 90% and the 10% that are responsible for 50% of the emissions, we're then started to be pressured and cornered and encouraged to change. It becomes a political issue, doesn't it? And I want to talk about economics as well before we're done, because I think a big part of this is about our economic systems too. Okay, so I like this picture, a blue hand. We're blue people. We can all have a net benefit on the planet. How about that? You're responsible for sequestrating more carbon than you release, that you plant significantly more trees than you consume, build more topsoil than you're responsible for, putting pressure on for your own resources. We can do this if we're organized. We can do this if we create sort of cohesive groups of people with common goals. And I think that's why permaculture is so powerful. It's because we all have this common vested interest in planet Earth. We all do. And in the process of healing the earth and healing our communities, we heal ourselves. And we can't see ourselves as part of, as separate from it. We're all part of it. And that inclusiveness is the only thing that we have, I think, to get to go forward. Some kind of eco-communism or something, I don't know, but we have to understand that we are just sharing common resources. The idea of ownership is really false. It's really temporary. A quote from the movie Crocodile Dundee, I like that, he was asked about Aboriginal land rights. And he said, Aboriginal land rights, he said the Aborigines consider it to be like two fleas arguing about who owns the dog. We don't own anything, we're just here passing through. Somehow we've created this political system that disempowers most of the people, and that disempowerment causes a lot of the problems. We can be empowered. We have to work. We have to see our ways forward, and that can be difficult, but that's what we need to do. You look into the faces of these individuals, so you see, human potential in everyone. I love this photo. Just visiting a school in Kamuli some years ago. Sorry about that, Lindsay. We're getting some sound problems. I wonder if our internet's a bit unstable today. all I can do is soldier on, I think, unless we
Yeah. Oh, okay, maybe it's mine then. Yeah, it just keeps dropping. So I'll just do my best to, or maybe watch it later if it keeps dropping out.
okay, Lindsay. Well, I will.
Okay.
Yeah, see how we get on. I'm interested to see
Okay.
whether it's you or me.
Okay, no worries.
Okay. Here's another way to think. This is something which I think quite a lot about. Yeah, Sean says he's okay. So maybe it is you, Lindsay. We shall see. But yeah, I did have a problem as well just now. We chatted about this already, but the median age in the UK is 47. In Japan, it's 51. In Uganda, it's 15. 1-5. Half of the population are below the age of 15. So that creates a sort of population pyramid that looks like that, rather than like sort of that of ours. As we age, as in the West, it begs the question really: is who's going to do the graft? Who's going to do the hard work? As we retreat into our sort of domestic suburban lives and our computer-based existences, who's going to do the graft? And who's going to care for the old people? Who's going to maintain the landscapes and stuff? Because we're at a very different place in our own kind of demographic sort of evolution, and to me, something about that really typifies the difference between first world and third world countries, and it's this: we're looking backwards. We're all about preserving old buildings and having been nostalgic about steam trains and Shakespeare and stuff. Where in the majority world, it's all about the future. Everyone's looking forward. Everyone's excited by what they can do next. It's very, very different energy. I think that countries like Uganda have the ability to completely overtake us, leave Britain behind, leave America. I think we're seeing the United States kind of fall apart. I think we've kind of we might be fighting against it with everything that we've got, but basically we've run a course that's really coming to an end, like climate change, the peak oil scenario, this sort of bank collapses, and the constant restructuring of our financial systems because they're not working. It's because we're not really producing anything, and we've actually now asset stripping our own economy to keep going. Essentially, it's like ripping the wires out of your own house, cashing them in to keep yourself going. We're at a crossroads. We really, really, really are. Aging population with an industrial base that's kind of over, and I think that's why our politicians want to get into big tech so much. Is they can it's the only thing that they can see as a way forward, and they're completely overlooking, firstly, the damaged ecology of our planet. Secondly, the idea that countries and nation states is a totally false idea. We are only one species sharing one planet, and somehow we have so much to give and offer, say in terms of the knowledge and experience, the education that we've had as first world people, and the majority world people have so much to offer in terms of the youth. It's the ultimate resource. So I think countries like Uganda, they've educated their population well. They're healthy. They're fit and strong, and they're full of energy and dynamism. They've got the internet. They've got a global outlook. The potentials are just enormous, and that's what we need to stay focused on. That's what we need to understand is there for us, to be done. So somehow we have to integrate all of those energies together, or get off our high horses and see past the divisions that we have created. I really, really, really think that. I think that the huge part of the sustainability, regenerative economy conundrum is that letting go of a lot of what I see really as 20th century ideas, nation states and kings and who's this and that, and it's bollocks. I'm sorry, it's really rubbish. And or maybe it was interesting then, but it's not now, because we are Homo sapiens. We are the inhabitants of the planet Earth, and we have to take a collective responsibility for that and get past these stupid divisions. I just don't see any other way. And why wouldn't we be? Because it's a whole lot more fun that way. Okay, so let's go back to permaculture in a wider thing. I was getting a little bit philosophical there. Let's hit, this is I love this as a definition of permaculture, as a graph, on a graph. This is what we're trying to get to. And in some ways, this represents designing and planting a forest garden, or even raising a baby, or anything like that. Let's think about the inputs and outputs. First, we're going to think about the inputs. The inputs is in red, and we've got time on the other axis. So let's say we plant a tree. We go to Stockbridge Village, we plant a fruit tree outside the old age home. What's the yield from that? Well, it's pretty much nothing. We're doing the work, we bought the tree, we dug the hole, we've mulched it, we've done, spent the money. So there's the tree gone in, but the return doesn't come back straight away. Okay, you get a slight warm glow of satisfaction when you plant it, but in terms of energy transfer, in terms of real physical tangible yields, they don't come straight away. Maybe it takes a couple of years, 2 or 3 years before that fruit tree starts yielding. And when it does, you don't get much. You just get 3 or 4 apples. So we're still pruning it, looking after it, worrying about it, mulching it, thinking about companion plants. And then slowly the tree does start to produce. And as the tree becomes more established and stronger, it requires less input from us. And as the yield goes up, the inputs go down. So permaculture is a long-term, it's upfront investment for a long-term benefit. That's how we think about it. And we're trying to design and build systems in which over time, the inputs go down, and over time, the outputs or the yield goes up. And there's some point somewhere in the future, we'll be past this maturity point where the yields just start growing and the inputs almost disappear. So we reach a situation then where we're in constant production, and the only work really is pruning and picking the fruits, sort of metaphorically. Again, same with perhaps child rearing. I mean, other than a cute smile and a gurgle, you don't get much back from the baby until they start growing and developing, and they're old enough so you can send them down the coal mine to earn some money for you, or maybe not that. But think about this. So permaculture is an upfront investment. The yields come, the return comes. When it does, it's small. Over time, it develops. And that's the metaphor for. And again, this is sort of how we're got to get out of the mess that we're in. Is a lot of this upfront work is being done now, has been done. I like to show lots of project ideas so you can see that, they're not all necessarily runaway successes, but this is how, say, a forest grows on a fallen forest. Who knows what detritus came perhaps from the Stockbridge project that might reassemble into something bigger and better in the future. We've certainly explored ways forward and found new pathways. So I want to change a perspective to see people as the solution, not the problem. And understand that investing in people is a long-term thing, that the yield at first isn't that obvious, but when it comes, it becomes very significant. So if you watch The Power of Community, you'll see what I mean. But if you think about how we're investing in people in Uganda, and how the impacts that they're creating sort of downstream in time is really encouraging me to think that this is been very worthwhile work. I liked this little cartoon. I can't remember where I got it from. It was collecting little things. It's about perspective, depending on perspective. And there was a couple of street dogs, and one of them shouting out, hey, Woofy, how do we get to the other side of the street? And this other little dog's on the other side of the street, and it's thinking, scratching his head, but you are on the other side of the street. Because from his perspective, they are. So it's about perspective, okay? Maybe we already are on the right side of the street. Maybe we have everything that we need to solve the problems. We just need to get on with it. Maybe all sorts of things. I like this picture too, about perspective. I enjoy showing this to African students as well. And this is an important thing to think though. And it's just 2 or 3 different things. One is, when we have the globe or the map of the world, why do we always put north at the top? Because there is no top or bottom in space, up or down. It's totally relative. We put Europe at the top because we want it to look important. We want it to be in the middle. We create world maps where England, UK is in the middle and at the top. Like, why? It's fairly arbitrary to cut it down the Atlantic Ocean. You could cut it down the Pacific Ocean. You get a very different impression. We have fabricated a view of the world of which we are the center. That's our choice, and that's part of our own arrogance, if I can say that, because I think it probably represents that. And part of our worldview, perhaps, that we need to challenge, because maybe we're not quite at the center of the world in the way that people want to be. The next thing, of course, is on the axes, and as we get closer to the equator, everything's squished together. So as you move towards the poles, or the countries in the more northerly latitudes are then distorted and made look bigger. So there's another sort of misrepresentation of the way that we perceive our place in the world. We make our countries look much bigger, more important, and more central than they really are, and we suppress that of the vision for other countries. Maybe other cultures do that. I'm not saying maybe it's right or wrong or something, but I'm just saying that's what we do, and therefore that distorts your own impression. You can fit most of the rest of the world into Africa. Actually, it's enormous, but it doesn't look like it on the map. Perspective. The next thing we can say when we look at this map, and this is really the thing that most excites me, interests me out of it, is these are the nations of Africa had it not been colonialized. Okay, big debate, who knows? But and again, I can't tell you the source of the map. I wish I should have done. I know that a lot of thought went into this. I know it was done by African historians, and but what we can see is nations of people represented, rather than the real estate, those straight lines, those colonial boundaries, which was all about that copper's mine, the access to that river is mine, that seaport is mine, that's British, that's German, that's whatever, French, Italian, Portuguese, the partition of Africa by European nations, as we still see Africa as a pile of resources waiting for us to exploit. We lend countries like Zambia money to develop their copper so they can sell it back to us at a loss. It's just wrong. I honestly believe as well, for the world to solve its problems, is we have to empower, especially African nations, to lead a way towards an inclusive world, because I think without it we don't have a chance. And Africa is not responsible for the emissions that is now driving climate change, but Africa has the ability to help massively reduce the impact of those emissions by absorbing a lot of that carbon back into its forests. And that sounds a bit of the colonial thinking, but it has to be led and managed. Habitat restoration to meet the needs of local people with local resources has to be led by empowered African nations and communities, I believe. Yeah, it really is wrong, Michelle. And you can point the finger at China, but we could also say is that China is also the only country that's currently investing into Africa. There's nowhere else there's no one else trying to invest into African sort of infrastructure and development, and it's not a fair or equal relationship. And so of course it tilts towards the Chinese. But I think that, again, is we have to understand our own. Part of that is we're not investing in there either, and there is a need. Yeah. If anybody has read The Famished Road by Ben Okri, that was it was a Booker Prize-winning novel or Nobel Prize-winning novel. And the metaphor of the road, and as the road reaches, from the port, from the town into the community, it sucks out the people, sucks up the wealth. It's a one-way journey. It doesn't ever come back. And again, that sort of view of our colonial extraction, we just left holes in the ground. We didn't give anything back, and we've left debt. The French are still extracting repayments from their ex-colonies for the infrastructure that they built for those very same roads. It's so wrong, and can be so right, because all we've got to do is flip the perspective. I think it's coming. I really do. I think because it has to. Anyway, perspective, looking at the way we look at things, matters a lot. Okay, so here's this is a big idea. This is the permaculture flower, and this comes from the work of David Holmgren. And I always used to leave this out of the course, actually, because I thought it's one of those things. Some things in permaculture are a bit flowery, a bit ill-defined, bit, I don't know. I like, I was trained in economics and ecology, so I don't know what about. But the more I looked into this diagram, the more I actually started to realize this is our permaculture journey. This is our sort of pathway. This is small and slow solutions as well, so it overlinks with tomorrow's theme. But it's how we change the world, and to understand that we're already on that pathway. So firstly, David puts at the heart of this journey is a commitment, to study, to think about, to really bring into your own perspective these ethics and design principles of permaculture. Earth care, people care, fair share. How we work in a harmonious way with other people, with the landscape, towards long-term objectives, meet our needs, but meet the needs of the community and meet the needs of the living planet. We're not going to get there in one fell swoop, one step. And I told you also we're also not here to critique each other and judge each other by saying, look at the size of your car, or how many holidays you had, and how many burgers you ate in the bad old days or something. It's not helpful. It might help us, we need to reflect on our own perspectives about, what we can do, but just measuring and just whatever, being all of this, I don't even know what these words mean, but all these things that come out in the media now about wokeness, and everybody's measuring everybody else because they're not perfect, or they haven't thought about gender fluidity enough or something. Is, look, we're all trying to learn. We're all on the same, we have to understand, we all are here sharing this planet together. We're in a crisis. Let's find the commonality to find our ways forward and not be judging each other so much. I understand that we're all imperfect, but we can all learn and create a more positive approach. So maybe in our first circuit, our first learning pathway is just this inner ring, in which maybe on your PDC or through your previous reading and research or reflections on your own life, we're thinking about, I'm interested in permaculture. I'm interested in being part of the solution. I'm interested in committing myself to this, partly for my own personal benefit, but I want to create harmony around me in the world. So when we learn these ideas, and then our decision now is to bring that into the world. We're going to become permaculture designers. We're going to consciously apply these ideas and perspectives into our world. So permaculture is holistic. It touches on many different areas of our lives. And again, I don't think there's anything that David Holmgren is proposing is saying, this is it. This is only this model. It's a way of looking at things. If you find it useful, then great. And if you don't, then, there's other things that I know that you will. And this journey from David's thoughts really begins with ourselves, and it begins internally. It's about health and spiritual well-being. It's about personal growth. It's also about being healthy, right? Your own energetic, your body that you're in, and your mind and your thoughts, and product of your behaviors and what you eat and the things that you're influenced by and stuff like that. And instantly, though, you realize that these areas, the petals of the flower, is that they overlap. And that's because obviously we can't separate out exclusively these different areas of our life. They all are interconnected. And then a lot of the to do with our own spiritual health and well-being is actually to do with money. It's about feeling secure, finding how we meet our needs, job, and the things that go with that. So if we're not able to meet our needs, we're constantly in fear about how we're going to pay our bills tomorrow. Then we're stressing all the time. So on our journey of self-development, one of the first things we're confronted with and we have to think about is how we make our living. Now, you might just be a wage slave. You might just be doing a job because it pays the bills. That's fine. That's how most people are. We can't all necessarily work in, whatever, community gardens or something, however you might become a horticulturist or something. In fact, so much of the world of permaculture is in the human sphere anyway. So, some people make that mistake. They think they have to be a gardener or something, and you don't. But we do need to think about the fact that we need to meet our own needs, and in the way that we do that, that brings us into contact with all sorts of other kind of economic systems and other sort of various complexities, which we need to know something about. Anyway, so we can carry on as in meeting our own needs, that might bring us into contact with working with other people. So we might need to know a bit about different forms of governance, different ways in which we can collaborate with people, structures for businesses, for enterprise, also ways of owning things, land tenure, especially if we're going into I want to do a one planet development, or I want to collaborate with my neighbors to do some kind of a garden. Is how's that going to be owned? How are we going to work together? How are we going to resolve, differences and stuff like that? How can we build a consensus? So there's a whole set of skills there about how we relate to other people. So we've got the finance and resources and those kind of hard realities. And then the next sort of set of realities is how we relate to other people, how we own land, how we have access to it, so that we can, realize our aspirations. And all of that obviously also overlaps with, well, especially if we have access to land, is how we're going to look after that. And nature stewardship, land and nature stewardship. There's another massive area of learning in that. Now, we might know some about that, we might be totally new to it, but we accept that we're all on this kind of learning pathway that, it's a spiral. It represents that incremental growth model that we talked about yesterday. That little bit, slowly, something that builds on itself and slowly accelerates. So we start off at the scale at which we're comfortable. We're just visiting ideas. We're thinking about it. We begin to apply it to ourselves. We begin to bring some of that into the world of work, into the other relationships you might have around sharing land or other community things, operating with other people. We can then think about how we relate to the land. Can we do that in a way in which is a positive stewardship? Land often has buildings, and there's also a relationship between land and buildings, because buildings have shadows, they have windy sides, they have sunny sides, they collect water, they create zone arrangements, so you get intensity of human activities around doorways and pathways and stuff, access points. So there's an overlap and a flow between all of these things. And we're working with land and buildings, and that always we're going to learn skills. There's tools and technology involved. Again, these things all sort of like come within they'll kind of come together, but they're separate areas as well. And then as we make this journey, as we move through these processes, we are learning. That was like the postman. One moment. thought it might have been my coffee beans arriving from Uganda, but it isn't. So disappointed about that. Never mind. This is something I say a lot. As an adult, as someone with life experience, as you move through life, is we all have a responsibility to share what we've learned. Education or culture, if you like, a sort of a wider expression of accumulated knowledge, feeds in and develops our own culture. Permaculture. We're trying to shift culture. We're trying to incorporate new ideas, if you like, into our cultural genome. We can't just be thinking selfishly about how many Adidas trainers we can consume. We have to think about how that impacts on the natural world, and we have to use our accumulated knowledge for educational objectives. So all of that brings us back to the start. We're back to health and spiritual well-being. But in some ways, my health, my spiritual well-being is enhanced because I've checked in with all these different areas of my life, and I haven't got to where I want to go yet, but I've made a step forward. Look, so I'm back. I've done the circuit. I'll come back to where I started from, but I'm a step forward. And again, that's a very interesting thing about the spiral. It represents an advancement. Each circuit represents a step forward, a furthering towards our collective goals. Now, again, when I looked at this before and I thought it was all a bit flowery, I wasn't quite onto it yet. I then thought about the journey that we went on with our housing co-op, with Chicken Shack. And I wanted to talk about that as well this morning, because that was a journey that was both about people and place. I've got a, yeah, anyway, okay. And on that it started with my own individual assertion that I wanted to do something. I wanted to be part. At the time, I really was worried about my health and spiritual well-being, and didn't want to be sucked into the machine. I didn't want to end up doing some job I hated just for my own objects, whilst understanding that was having a negative impact on the wider world, especially knowing what I know about how the long-term impacts of pollution or climate change, or even the economic destruction caused on the majority world by our economic systems is. I couldn't be part of it and be a rational person. I just couldn't. And my way out of it, my way to try and escape the thing, was to take control of my life in a much more deeper way. I wanted a home, but I didn't want a mortgage. I'd seen so many people get caught in boom and bust property things, and also that thing of, especially when I was living down in the southeast, in Reading, properties are expensive there. So even if you get a good job, you're running on a treadmill for years and years and years before you can make any, you've essentially lost control of a large part of your life if you're not careful. These were my perspectives. It's different for everyone. I really recognize that. And the beginning of that process for me of gaining that greater degree of control was beginning to find out about finances and economics, and actually work out how to write business plans, how to approach banks and ethical investors and things like that, to be able to, if you like, win investment for projects and for progress to happen. And I met people. Once I'd committed to that journey, I found that I met people. They stepped out of the woodwork out of nowhere. And I met a very nice older gentleman who had worked in banking, and he'd quit the day he realised exactly what it was, that the way that the businesses worked, and went to move into cooperatives. And he was someone who introduced me into co-op finance and stuff. Thinking about how we might, as a group of people, access land, buildings, for the purposes of doing permaculture and having a life, I found out about land tenure and community governance, which was through the co-op movement, through Radical Roots. They trained me in how to do collective decision making and all of the different things, and cooperative ownership, all of those elements of that. Started to learn about that, and at the same time studying permaculture, so that we then also increasingly understanding how to manage the land. Working at Centre for Alternative Technology for many years, they were very, very interested in environmental building and ecological structures, choice of materials, thermo efficiency of combustion, choice of materials, choice of locations for housing. All of these things sort of fed into my learning, And then in the process, yeah, I started to learn how to actually physically do these things. And 10 years into my learning journey in permaculture was when I had some volunteers staying at Chicken Shack, and they said to me, didn't you guys used to host permaculture courses? And I said, well, yeah, we did host 1 or 2 years ago. And they said, well, if you did it again, I'd come. And I thought, there's a challenge. So 10 years in, that was when I first started my journey then as a permaculture teacher, which also helped my own internal development. Didn't necessarily massively help my finances and economies, but it did, of course, because I've never made a load of money out of this. I don't have any savings, but I'm also debt free. I'm also a tiny bit of debt, but is it's done okay. I'm not weighed under huge drifts of unpaid credit cards or what can we say? Whatever. Years and years of mortgage in my personal name, and I'm learning more about as we go around. I'm definitely on my second or third circuit now. That's what I'm saying. So think about how your own journey is and where you might be in relation to some of these things, and how it progresses. So this next picture is a little bit messy, and ignore everything in pink because those are all specific things. Some of you might recognize Trevlek Farm, Kaibodva, Slamfast High School, but this is me putting my annotations into it. Think about how you might put your annotations into it. Okay, so again, thinking about David's flower, I thought how I might take these ideas to create what I'm loosely calling Permaculture Academy, which is the project which I'm trying to work on now. Is I want to be able to greatly facilitate permaculture education. And I asked myself about the process and can we create the most inclusive process, step-by-step learning process. So inspired by David's flower, I kind of created my own, and this is about learning about how to teach permaculture, I guess. And for me, the whole process, if it's going to be successful, it's got to start with the most important thing in the world, and that is me, or shall we say you. The thing that you're most interested in is yourself, not in a selfish way, but in a self-empowering way. And if we can learn about personal change and growth and development, whether we're bringing yoga and Tai Chi into our lives, or better eating, or just a better positive mental attitude, that's personal growth and development, isn't it? And when you bring people together into a learning environment, the first thing you're trying to understand is, look, I'm on this learning journey and so are you. So how do we make the me become we? So that we now realize that we're collaborating on this, that yes, I want to be the best permaculture designer in the world, so do you. Okay, or whatever that ambition, however that ambition might express itself. So the first part for me in this learning journey that I'm trying to think about is how we move from me to we, how we feel included in groups, co-ops, projects, communities, seeing like cause and objectives. And these red lines are trying to give a direction, but also is the connections flow in all directions. So that's why it's a bit messy. And there's a two-way interaction, going both ways. So we're starting with, though, it starts with me, and that me becomes we. It starts with you, and that becomes us. We're on a team. We're working together. And then the next thing happens when I created little overlaps between my things too. I wanted to be like David. I wanted to look like I was clever. And as we move forward into this, we go from people is we're working together, me, you, we, us. Oh, ding-a-ling-a-ling, lunchtime. The next thing that really brings us together is food. Preparing food, harvesting it, cooking it, caring for the animals, fermenting things, storing it, thinking about how that relates to health, to diet, to insulin levels, I don't know, internal homeostasis. Food's everything. Food's so important. Food's fun. Food can be such a chore. Oh God, I've got to cook the dinner. But the inverse of that, it can be just such an expression of creativity, right? And especially if you're surrounded by a herb garden and fresh, lovely ingredients that you can just go and grab handfuls of, so much more inspiring. And then there's something about that food preparation, processing, sharing, cleaning up afterwards, that is also team building and group building. So can we appeal firstly to people's self-interest, use that self-interest as a tool to make people feel as though they're part of groups and teams, reinforce those groups and teams with food, and through food really make people understand that they're connected to the land, understand that our food comes from somewhere, it comes from the soil, it comes from this ecological process of interaction between soil and water, the evolution that created the microbiome that makes the soil and water clean and productive, forests, traditional farming systems, or anything, and obviously compost is such a big part of that. And then within land, habitat restoration, carbon sequestration, so many different things. But if you like, you haven't got to argue or sell anything to anybody, because this is all about self-interest. It's all about me, we, us, lunchtime, where lunch comes from, where the residues of lunch go, how that in itself, that interaction with the land is an energy transaction. We're putting our time and effort, work, you know, building raised beds, making mulch, planting plants, all of those things that we do. It's an energy transaction, food. And energy then, when we think about that, that touches on buildings, materials, the embodied energy in the buildings and materials that we use. It's about how we generate energy, things like thermal mass, passive solar, I don't know, all of that. We're trying to create holistic, rounded people that understand how all of these things connect together. And in this sort of model that I'm thinking of is how to bring people to experience that. So whether at Cumhari we're just creating the roundhouse, or the pizza oven, or making biochar, is trying to get people to understand materials and energy in a way they both relate to land, and also how it relates to money, how it relates to surplus, because we can create more carrots than we need. We can do something with the ones that are left over. It represents a surplus. It represents economic activity, and maybe there's loads of things within that world of economic activity that are really interesting and empowering, like creating your own currencies, like local exchange trading systems, barter systems, highly democratized systems like credit unions and stuff like that. Things that then enable us to fulfill our ambitions. The sixth part, which I call communication, that's the design workshop. That's how we put ideas out into the world that actually is going to recruit more people. It's going to inspire more people to find out about permaculture. So I also thought about how this might feed back on itself. A retort kiln learning process draws in more people, because within this process we're communicating our own work and what we're doing. So I try and capture much of the output as I can from projects. I put them on blogs and diaries and social media, or bring them into my slideshows and so forth, because I want to tell all those stories. Hopefully the story of Stockbridge has planted a seed in you, that you might take onto your permaculture learning pathway. So I think somewhere between David's flower and my academy model, I want you to sort of think about how this is an ongoing process that draws in more connections from the outside, and how it can really build on itself step by step, really take us somewhere. And look, this is what it looks like. There's us a few years ago starting off the Kai Bodfach garden with a few school kids. You can see it doesn't look like much is going on, but you've seen it where it's got to since. It's built on itself. In the process of that happening, it's educated me. It's educated some of the staff at the school, and in many ways it's touched and inspired those kids. I have no idea what they take away from that, what seeds they may or may not plant as a result, but something, you know, so much more than nothing. Similar things in Uganda. Okay, yeah, right. This now goes into lots of, where are we at? 10 to 11. So we did an hour, didn't we? We did 9 till 10, and we're going to do 10 to 11. Okay, so I'll do 10 minutes of this and we'll have a break. How do we solve problems? This is about working with people. This is in the idea of integrate rather than segregate. Sometimes it's easy just to go off and do it by yourself. People. So difficult, especially when you get a problem. How do you get past it? And some people are looking for problems. And all of this is part of the challenge, and it's not easy, and I don't have an easy answer other than you have to keep working at it, as far as I can tell. We, in our Western culture, and I think it is not exclusive, but we're very guilty of this. It's a prominent thing within our Western culture, is we tend to see things in a black or white way, in a sort of rock logic. We're either black or white. It is either black or white, or good or evil. Church, religion can be quite polarizing in that way. A sinner. Or are you left or right? Was it a radical communist socialist, or you a screaming fascist? Where's the middle ground? Come on, you red or blue. Where's the inclusivity? It's always us versus them, isn't it? Win or lose. 1 + 1 is 2. Social media's amplified this. The modern world has amplified this. We're all on one side or the other, and that is serving the forces of division, not the forces of unity. And there are rights and wrongs, and there are lefts and rights, but so what? It doesn't necessarily, being wrong isn't necessarily a crime, and sometimes being wrong is part of the process of learning. It's difficult though, because some people are doing really, really bad things, and then somehow they need to be stopped. So I get that too. I'm not like super naive about this, but at the same time, especially when we commit to working together, and we can find a common goal, a long-term objective that you and I are working together, or we're working with the community, just as I was in Stockbridge. I'm sure if we'd sat down and talked about politics or talked about whatever, certain issues, we would have found all sorts of things that I would have found difficult, and perhaps, would have been less ready to want to work with those people. But instead we focus on the things that we did have in common. We didn't get into who's good and who's bad. We got into is, how does this work? What can we do with that? Oh, look how this might improve our community. That's different. That's inclusive. That's what we have to think like. We've got to throw this away. This is another part of the world that we have to leave behind. It's what you might call adversarial thinking. My idea against your idea. Bang, bang, bang. I won, you lost. I'm the champion, or vice versa. No. How do we replace adversarial thinking with parallel thinking? Can we think in the same way? Because let's just say that each one of us is bringing a different perspective to something. Each one of us maybe has something to offer that the other doesn't. The stuff that Sean knows that I don't know, and Michelle has a perspective on things that Lindsay doesn't have, but then Lindsay has something really unique to bring to it from her own perspective. So it's not about, well, let's have a fight and Sean wins and we'll do what Sean says. We're going to harvest the best from all of us. That's the parallel thinking, and just because Steve's the big teacher doesn't mean I'm right about everything, or you have to do what I say. Actually, that's just my role, right? There's other people that are much better at other stuff, practical things or whatever, I do big picture, other people do detail. So let's all value and be proud of what we're bringing to the party. And it's not a competition of who's got the most or the best. It's about how we get the best out of each one of us as, working together. And again, this is a different way of thinking in our world of, I hate the bloody Olympics, all of this exceptionalism. I'm the champion. I run a millionth of a second faster than you. I've dedicated 8 years of my life to running 100 meters. fractionally faster than someone else. What a waste of time. One's the winner and everyone else is somehow inferior. I just don't think like that. How do we all come together? And what are the things that make us feel that we're on the same page and working towards common objectives? That's what we need to be thinking about. That's why I always say permaculture is about finding the bigger picture first before we get lost down in the detail. You and me can argue the hell about what kind of zucchini is best to grow, but really what we need to understand is we can't grow anything unless we've got healthy soil, so let's make compost. You know, the bigger picture gets us there. So it's a switch to investment thinking is what we're encouraging within permaculture. Investment thinking is a stitch in time saves 9. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. You know, don't wait for the problem to get really big before you try and address it. Head it off before it even starts. That's what I mean by you're investing in a thing before it's really unraveled. An awareness of connections between here and there and then and now and then. Okay, quite like that. Again, what I told you, everything's connected. What we saw the walls at the beginning, everything is connected. You might not be able to see how it is or how it exactly works, but for sure it is. So we have to work with that. That's all part of our investment. When we work in a group, there are certain patterns of behaviors that can present themselves, that can happen, which just suppress creativity. And these are things we want to avoid. I'm sure you've all sat in a group and you've heard some of these being said. These are the idea killers. Yeah, we tried that before, it didn't work. That's not how we do it here. How are we going to pay for that? You never get this one past the boss. Management will never go for that. Yeah, it's a good idea, but we, you know, someone else has had, it's the same idea as what we had before. Or, I don't know. There's loads of those things, isn't there? There's a lot of that CAT actually when I was there. Roll their eyes. Oh God, not that. We've done that before. Sometimes that's the case, but look, that's just shooting somebody down before the ideas even escape their mouth. A positive idea needs to be nurtured. It's like when a baby's born, it's vulnerable and weak, right? You can look at that baby. It's never, you know, look how pathetic it is, sort of thing. It's like, yeah, it's a baby, right? So a new idea, it might be the most precious thing in the world, and you're going to squish it because you're going to say, nah, before you've really understood what that person's even trying to say. So there's a thing to try and get out of. Understand that ideas are the raw material of how we, you know, of creativity, and that we need to be much more nurturing with that. Okay, that's something that needs to be established in a group before the group can work together effectively. It's like you need to establish your rules of engagement before you engage. It's really hard to get so far into the thing and then start to assert the rules, because then, you know, problems are happening, and then people think that you're using those rules for a specific reason, because you're trying to make it hard for me, you know. So it's people's sensibilities get really rattled sometimes in groups. So these are all things you have to be very aware of, and it can take sometimes adept facilitators, people whose skill it is to help groups perform and function well. It can take that sometimes to make things work well. So never be scared to invest in the group process. Never be scared to invest in good sort of management or good people skills, because often that's the key that unlocks the puzzle. It's the people. The people so often are the problem, but the people are the solution. The people where the energy and the creativity and the dynamism comes to solve problems. So if we are being a systemic thinker, we're trying to see the whole picture. We're actually trying to consider different perspectives rather than just advancing our own. Me. No, what about me? What about me? What about Sean? What about Michelle? What about Lindsay? Let's bring those perspectives on board. Or Ian, whoever we were with. Let's understand that there are always connections and interdependencies between things. That we all have our own mental models and assumptions. As a systemic thinker, we try to think about long-term effects as well, not just the immediate thing. So again, in Stockbridge, I'm trying to start processes without really knowing where they might go, but trying to understand that they could have a long-term impact on the estate, on the community. And that there's often cause and effects relationships between problems and solutions and problems. They can be complex as well. So by being systemic, seeing the bigger picture, we try to sort of bring all of these different things into our perspective also. Imagine how I put in these pictures as a chance to go back to Forest Gardens, but also to think about that, say, in a system, in a team, a guild, each element is behaving differently and contributing in its own particular way. So here is our tropical forest garden system. Creepers and vines are occupying this tall canopy tree. We've got understory trees and shrubs and ground cover and all these things that we talked about, root layers. Imagine what that might look like perhaps in a temperate system. So understand that this comfrey plant is part of the long-term fertility cycle. This pecan nut tree is part of the shade-giving sort of big picture nurturing. So when we work as a team in people, understand that we can't all be the pecan nut tree and we can't all be like the borage or the comfrey. We're all fitting together and contributing in some way of our own. When I talk about it with other people, another group, other contexts, I often talk about football teams. It's not a football team if everybody wants to be the goalie. That doesn't work. If everybody wants to be the centre forward, you need, defence, midfield. You need attack. You need a manager. You need the guys who clean the boots and who make the lunch and the turnstile people or whatever. It's a teamwork. It's a team, and communities are complicated and stuff like that. So, it's really good to bring these things into our perspective as a group. So here's a very simple community engagement consensus process. Now, let's say this might be how we might approach doing a project like this, say within Stockbridge Village, to bring about food forests or any other complex system. It helps to have some experience and knowledge in the room. A trained consensus facilitator might do that. It's all relative. It depends on the scale of the problem and the complexity of the problem. So how trained do they need to be? Well, how big a challenge are we facing? It could be, and one way to learn and gain these skills is by working on small scale within your communities, and then gaining skills which you can then take outside. So stage one of a consensus process would be to stakeholder assessment. What's a stakeholder? A stakeholder is anyone who is some way part of the project. They might be a beneficiary. They might be part of it. They might in some way get to shape it and be within it. So in Liverpool, stakeholders included very much the target populations of people. Included the management people from the housing association. I need to understand how the maintenance team worked. There was no point in me putting trees. They were going to get cut down by their lawnmowers. I needed to have a sense of who the stakeholders were and how they contributed to it in different ways. Next stage then, having had a thought about that, is to agree on the procedure. You can't impose these things. People aren't very good at just going along with things if they feel that they've not been, incorporated into it. So procedure is what we're going to see in front of us. So we're going to say, all right, we're going to have a couple of community meetings. We'll have an examining issues. We'll create a model, and then we'll think about how we're going to implement it. Okay, everybody agrees to that procedure. So now we set a date public date, and we can kind of come together and we can explore what this is all about. So there's lots of knowledge. A plenary session is when you all come together at the beginning and maybe at the end of a session, and then and in between you might break down into small groups where you look at different aspects of the problem, and then maybe come back together, feed that together. So what's so important, and again, I can show some models to show how to do this if time allows, but we need to break down our big objective of let's increase the health and well-being of Stockbridge Estate, let's improve people's nutrition and exercise and make people feel more socialized. Okay, great. But we've got to break that down into who's going to do the planting, where that's going to go, how we're going to relate to materials, or how we're going to resolve whatever. We break that down into task groups, we examine those issues, we feed those things back. Because I'm all the time say I'm a community member and I'm just worried about, say, vandalism, or I just think, why are we doing all this about trees? We need to talk about dog poo. Dog poo's the thing that really rattles my cage and makes my life annoying, So if I don't get listened to, I'm just going to be a naysayer going, look, these stupid people talking about trees when everybody knows the real issue is dog poo. Please, so I might end up, I could have been an ally of the project, but I'm throwing stones at the project instead because I didn't feel listened to. So it's very, very important that people are listened to. And if someone was to come and if someone had have said that, I would have thought about that really carefully. And there you go. You've seen our dog composting unit. There's ways in which you can show to those people, yeah, we're listening. Yeah, we can incorporate your concerns into the project. This is what happens in this examining issues stage, okay? So at the end of the day, hopefully if it's all gone well, we have a closing plenary session, and then we can capture the ideas that came out of that group. It's so important is that everybody feels that they shaped the process or they've been listened to. Because if they don't, they might even become an adversary. So yeah. And then stage 4, reaching agreement. So maybe the next day, maybe we need some time, but we go away and we process all of that, of the information that came out, and we represent it in a way in which everybody can say, oh yeah, that's what went on in that task group, that's what went on in that task group, these are the conclusions. Now we have a plan, we can put some dates. Okay, we're going to develop area B and area D. Area A we're not going to bother with because of concerns that you raised, or whatever, however the process might have been. Very, very important to see that people's contributions have been valued, even if you didn't follow their their advice, that you factored their concerns into it, or their suggestions into the process. So hopefully when we get to stage 4, reaching agreement, we've brought everyone with us. There isn't loads of disgruntled people standing outside going, well, they never talk to me and I think it's a stupid idea. Because why do you think it's a stupid idea? I need to hear that. And if we can allay your concerns, then hopefully we can bring you back on board. Or quite possibly, your concerns are based in a truth that we haven't considered. I'm coming here from the outside. You live on the estate. There's things that you know about the estate that I could never know. So I need to listen to you too. From then, we can then come to the idea of, okay, implementation plan. And we can break down our big, so we have a meeting, have our big, here's all of our objectives, break it down. Like you guys are going to go into the plant nursery. You guys are going to go away and research into the, start the tree propagation or something. Breaking a big task down into a small task. But in the same process is making everybody understand and feel that they've been brought with in the process. This is what's really key. As we start implementing things and actually, let's try out our first little pocket garden or whatever it was that we're doing. Can we evaluate that? Can we evaluate that process as we're going along and constantly reviewing the outcomes to make sure that we are operating in the way that we wanted to? There's a simple process, but seeing how we engage with community, how we build consensus, and then that enables us to move forward and to do things like the Stockbridge project that I showed you. Okay, 10 past 11. That's okay. We go to 1. We got loads of time. For some reason, I'm worried about time today. I'll just do a few more slides and then we'll take a little break, 1:15. Okay, so this is a really great tool. I'll touch on this. I sometimes like to do this as a role play, but I can't do it now, so I'll just explain to you, and then we'll have a quick coffee break, 15 minutes. Edward de Bono was someone who wrote a book some years ago, and I don't know what it was called, but the theme of it was thinking about thinking. And it's really, his sort of key point is that thinking is an active process, generating ideas. And can we find ways to be more effective at that? Surely, if we're going to invest into anything, is the thinking about how we approach thinking would be a really good thing. And one of the things that came out of this is this 6-hat thinking model. And it's a tool for parallel thinking. It's a really great tool for groups. You can use it individually as well, but we'll see as we expand as we go into it. So we have many thinking tools for argument and debate. And the 6 hats methods releases us from argument and lays out all the views in parallel. The hats let us separate out different aspects of thinking. We can politely encourage others to vary their thinking by putting on or taking off a certain hat or perspective. So Edward de Bono described 6 hats. They are directions. They're not descriptions of the thinking of the thinker, but they're like a perspective. And each thinker could be allowed to wear and use all of the hats, not at the same time. That would be silly, but to explore from each perspective. And I think that's a very, very important idea. So look, this is how it works in a group. So the green represents new ideas, the yellow represents positive thinking. So it's very kind of easy and fun to be the green-yellow guy. I'm a green-yellow guy. Yeah, I got some great ideas. Let's go out and plant a forest garden. Let's make the world a better place. Positive, energy. I'm taking that role in the group. Now, I'm almost inviting someone else in the group to say, oh, come on, Steve, we've got other priorities, and where's the money going to come from for that? And not being very realistic, because there's, so as much as I'm taking the green-yellow role, I might be forcing someone else into a, say, black hat or white hat role, which is maybe less fun to carry that portfolio. But the black hat is the critiquing, spotting the limitations, the problems. So then I might get a little bit, no, come on, it's going to be fine. We're going to do this. It's going to work. And then again, I'm kind of pushing someone to take a counterpoint behind me. Now, very soon we might start to see that as conflict. I'm saying to that person, hey, why are you always getting down on my ideas? Why are you criticizing me? I'm here trying to be positive, and as you just black hat, coming up with all the problems. Well, it's a natural thing that happens, isn't it? Like the seesaw effect. If I'm over promoting something, someone else is going to go, yeah, but have you thought about so and so? So this is a way in which we can all occupy each one of those perspectives. So instead of we now identify, oh, I'm the positive guy and you're the negative person. No one wants to be the negative person, but someone has to be the realist, or someone has to ask those difficult questions. So in a group, perhaps we can do all of them. So let's go through them. The white hat, white is for paper. They're quite easy to remember, actually. White is for paper. It's about information. What do we know? What do we not know? How are we going to get the information? Who's keeping the accounts? Are we keeping records? The minutes? What's the health and safety regulation for this? This is all white hat thinking, and it's important for the success of your project. But it's not always fun to be the one go, guys, health and safety, we're never allowed to do that. What information is available? What information do we need? How are we going to get that missing information? And and to set up systems that record and log things. Now, I'm learning a lot in project work that there's a lot of white hat work. There's a lot of reporting back to funders, showing evidence of what you've done, proving, if you like, the outcomes, the receipts, the tickets. God, is it dull? Doesn't feel like that's the exciting part of the project. But without it, you don't get the funding, you don't get the continued support. So you've got to do it. Well, you've got to build that function into your team and not just, see it as a negative. The red hat, red is, you can imagine a flush of anger in your face. It's about feelings, but it's also understands that we also are non-rational. We make decisions sometimes based on feeling, on our gut reaction, intuition. And sometimes it's good to own that. And rather than saying advance an intellectual answer, a reason for not doing something, the truth of it might be just feels wrong. I thought it's the right time. I don't know. I don't know. Sorry, guys. I don't know whether I'm not feeling it. I'm not. Just be honest. My red hat is saying no. You don't have to. At least again, I've had a chance to say that. I've had a chance to say my instinct told me not. Every other thing might be saying yes, but at least I had a chance to say that, and that's valued as well, because we can't pretend that we're not influenced by our emotions in the way we make decisions. Black hat. What are the problems? Difficulties, points for caution, risks, exposure. Is it going to work? We have to be able to ask those points without, and to explore that perspective without too much reprisal. It's a very important perspective. So yellow hat, benefits, positives, values. How to make it work. How to think that. I sort of think that when a new idea is born, green hat, creativity, green for life, for trees, for chlorophyll, it needs to be nurtured. So a new idea needs the warm glow of a yellow hat. It needs the warmth of the sun to germinate. So, and let's treasure ideas. Don't just black hat me the moment I'm born. We're setting an idea, squish all the life out of an idea before it's even breathed its first breath. Green is about creativity, alternatives. How do we overcome black hat difficulties? Green is also about coming up with new ideas. The blue hat is holding the space. The blue hat is the facilitator. Where do we start? What's the agenda? What are the objectives? Which hat should we use? What processes might we use? How are we going to go about doing this process? So again, you see that maybe I think these slides are sort of in the wrong order in the sense of you need the blue hat to hold the space. Say, okay, we're having a meeting. It's tomorrow. It's at 4 o'clock. It's talking about X, it's talking about Y, there's agenda objectives. I'm going to be in charge. Sean takes the minutes and whatever. Michelle's bringing a cake. Here we go. We're ready now to have our meeting. What's the meeting about? Well, we can generate some ideas, can't we? How can we look at the problems of our estate and how can we work with them to improve them? Let's pull out some of the ideas that you might have and let's germinate them. Let's make them grow. And look at them, and then with a realistic point of view, ask ourselves: well, is that really going to work? Can we afford it? Are there some problems? What difficulties might we encounter? What are our feelings about it? Do we actually know? Where's the information? What do we need? Who's going to go away and find that information? And then somehow that you can see how that sequence works really well. It derives a power from focused thinking. It can save a lot of time and it can take the ego out of the decisions. So it's sort of like, again, it's like getting everybody. So one way that we could do it is we might individually analyze something, but or we might use it as a conversational tool. But really, sometimes within meetings, it's really good to get everybody into a green hat thinking, everybody into ideas generation, everyone then into yellow hat thinking is, let's really look at those ideas and evaluate them positively. How can we improve on them, and can we see the possibilities before we start critiquing? And it's not saying that the critiquing isn't important, because it is, but if you've, say, doused their flames of creativity instantly with, we can't afford it, it's been done before, it won't work, world's all screwed anyway, etc., is, and then for sure that becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. It definitely won't work. So we move from adversarial to parallel, from all at once to each at turn, to separate ego and performance, to be respectful, and think. It allows for thinking about thinking. Yeah, it almost can be a game almost. Yeah, co-ops, working in groups. 11:20. Okay. Let's have now a break that I keep talking about and we haven't been having. Sorry, and then we'll come back and I'll do sort of chicken shack on groups a bit more, and just take these ideas a bit further forward. So if everybody's happy, we'll have 15 minutes and we'll come back at, what's that, 25 to 12. Is that okay? 11:35. 15 minutes long enough?
Yeah, Steve, can you put up that last slide about at the very end of the different hats?
Sure. That which one?
Go forward. That after ways to use the hats.
Yeah, this one there. Adversarial to parallel. That one. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Welcome. I'll see you in 15 minutes.
Okay.
I shall pause the recording. If you're ready, I shall begin. So we're talking about working in groups, and we've been talking about making decisions and valuing everybody's input. And I see all of those things as tremendously important. In terms of learning how to start housing co-ops and learning a lot of these cooperative techniques of working in groups, I learned a lot by attending Radical Roots meetings. Radical Roots is a secondary housing co-op. That means that its membership is all housing co-ops. A housing co-op, by definition, is an autonomous, independent unit, but they can choose to associate with each other within a secondary co-op for the purposes of learning, sharing best practice, maybe investment, spreading risk, building, teams, if you like. I don't think we would have been able to set up our first housing co-op, Chicken Shack, without support of Radical Roots. I've got so much information from them, and so much also with meeting people who were several years down the line, so they already had practical experience to share and perspectives to share. And then suddenly you realize that, of course, it's possible, because at first you feel like you're chasing a pipe dream, or people are telling you that you're being overly ambitious. It's really great. It's to associate with other people who have the experience and knowledge that can bring you towards your objective, your ambition. There's also a co-op, very bad at getting in touch with, but there's a secondary, another co-op called Catalyst Collective, and they specialize in doing co-op registration. So a housing co-op runs on a set of rules. Like any co-op it makes decisions democratically, and it makes those decisions democratically by having meetings. And the way that those meetings operate, and if you like, and the operating system of a housing co-op is governed by rules. And the first rule within co-ops is that if you want to join a co-op, anyone can apply to join a co-op, and the co-op can't discriminate against you on any particular random things like age, gender, religious persuasion, sexual orientation, etc. But the trade-off is you have to agree to be bound by the rules of the co-op. So anyone may join a co-op who can agree to be bound by the rules of that co-op. the co-op have a vacancy, then you may join. However, you need rules, and rules need to be watertight. They can't be too many grey areas, and you spend all of your time on lawyers trying to interpret your rules. So it's very important that to the bedrock of any association, I'm talking specifically about housing co-ops here, but it could be true for any other group, is to have a really good set of rules. The bedrock that you sit on are your rules, and that also within the rules it tells you how to change the rules, because they're not static. But if you join a co-op, you are joining it, and you'll be to agree to be bound by their rules such as they are at the point you join them. You can't say, yeah, I'm okay about rules 1, 3, and 5, but 2 and 6, you know, you can keep those. That's not how it works. You either join or you don't join. When you join, you can say, I would like to propose that we improve Rule 6, and here's my proposal. And then we might discuss that. And if we reach consensus, then we might change that rule. But only when we reach consensus. You can't just opt out of it. That's not the way it works. And when we joined Radical Roots, one of the things we got from them through our registration package, with which we did through Catalyst Collective, was a set of model rules, specially written for a fully mutual housing co-op, which was the model we were following. And to write a set of model rules usually costs money, because you need to have some legal advice, and they need to be phrased in a way in which it's obviously legally functional. There's not lots of grey areas. So that costs money, and I don't know what it costs, but let's say to get their first set of model rules written, let's say it costs £7,000, and then you resell a copy of it for £1,000 to the next co-op, and £1,000 to the next co-op, and slowly the price comes down as you average it out. And again shows the advantage, the potentials of collective buying power. So now I think you can register a housing co-op for about 350 quid now through Catalyst Collective, and you get their little membership pack. They do the registration for you with the Financial Conduct Authority, and then you're a limited company and you can trade. You can borrow money, you can own things, and you can trade, and then off you go. Yeah. I wanted to tell you this story, and I could tell it in parallel really to the whole groups and working with groups and things. And I also realized I need to make this PowerPoint much better. I've got loads and loads of photos from the Chicken Shack phase, but I haven't really put many of them in this slideshow. So, but maybe it's not a trip down memory lane, because this is my memory, it's not yours. We had a vision, we had an ambition. I did, and a friend. When it was two of us, it seemed very far off and felt like wishful thinking. And we spoke with friends, and we went through a whole process when I was still living in Reading, having regular meetings, putting little notices in the library and places like that saying we're interested in shared ownership of a farm, or I can't remember how I expressed it. And we got lots of people come along. We had some very productive and interesting meetings, and started to think about what that shared house, shared thing might look like. And this was still, I should go back a slide really, because I was still living in Reading here. And one of the things that we learned quite quickly was that of all the people that we were working with, most of them their dream wasn't to stay in Reading long term. So, and also some properties there were just so expensive that we realized that we'd all be slaves to working for a bank really, to establish ourselves there. So part of the realization for me over time was that as I started to learn more about how I might achieve this, I also realized that I wasn't going to do it there. And I'm not a city person. I didn't grow up in Reading. I only went to university there. I traveled a lot as well. So I wasn't strongly connected. But I'd been involved with risk, and the roof garden project, and well, that hadn't happened then, but I'd been involved with risk in the building and lots of other stuff. So I did have a big emotional connection to it, and I started teaching there as well. And letting go of all of that was actually more challenging than I realised. And we decided to come to Wales because we loved it. We always used to come to Machynlleth area anyway for years. As a kid, I'd come for holidays in Harloch and Cricket, a place like that. So I always in love in North Wales, and it's not that far from where I grew up. So it kind of made sense. And anyway, I won't tell too much of a story because I can go on about this for ages, but basically is we came, and the first place that we looked at to get a sense of what's out there, what's affordable, what could we achieve, was this farm, and it's called Bryn Llwyn. And it's between Tywyn and Barmouth on the coast in the middle of Cardigan Bay, and it's beautiful, it's special. It's a farmhouse. This is a 4-bedroom farmhouse, a little cottage which had been made from a stable, so it had been a stable. This was a garage, and then this was a cattle shed. And in front of it, there was a concrete block building that was full of chicken manure. And this was I took this photo in December 1994. December 94. And the land that came with it was this pine woodland behind the house, a paddock in front of it, and a wetland that goes off the picture over there. And it's about 4 acres, and some land around the house as well, a bit of garden. Very windswept, very run down, very never been improved. Always been too many animals there. Always everything overgrown, very muddy. You can see the land that used to be part of the farm, actually, which had been sold off previously. So this was a 40-acre hill farm. In its history, we looked it up on the National Library in Aberystwyth, and used to be a couple there, maybe with one other person, and they had 2 cows and 4 sheep and 3 pigs or something like that. And they worked on the other farms for the right to grow a few veggies. And so it was mainly just small-scale cattle, small-scale livestock farming. And as you know, over the years, it's that size of farm, it's just not big enough to be economic. And as they got sold off, that generation retired and died, they became surplus to requirement. And what had happened to this farm was the land had been bought by the neighbouring farm, who was trying to sort of be a bigger scale farmer. And the house and buildings were bought by a retired teacher from England. Him and his wife had the idea of, it's in Snowdonia National Park, him and his wife had the idea of doing a tourism business, bird spotting and hiking and stuff like that. They did that for about 4 years, and about 4 years into it, they said by year 4 they had made it almost financially viable. They'd done a cheap fix up on the buildings to make them habitable in the summer as holiday lets. But it'd just been a whole bunch of hard work, and by that time their marriage had failed, and they put the house on the market hoping to sell it, to get their money back. And they failed to sell it. It was on the market for 4 years. They put it on at a time when the market was at a real high, so they asked for way too much money. And they had some short-term tenants in it, whilst it was empty for 4 years. In that time, had some short-term tenants who didn't really respect it, overgrace it with goats and stuff like that, and then went back to being empty again. Eventually, we came along. I think it was on the market for 120,000 by then. It had been 160. We offered them 110, and they nearly bit our hand off. At the point of making the offer, we had £10,000 only, and a very vague idea about how we might go about financing it. But still was early on in my co-op journey. But what I did know is I'd done some research and I'd done some sums, and I'd realised that if you had 8 people paying £32 a week rent, that would multiply up, and that would be enough to service a mortgage and some loans to make it affordable. So that was so it was interesting. So even though it was the first place that we looked at, and I realised that instantly, because I'd done the homework, because I'd done the research, I kind of knew that it would suit our formula. It was possible. It was potentially viable. And one of the reasons I knew that was because of the work we'd done in advance with Radical Roots, going to their meetings for at least 2 years before I seriously tried to start a co-op. Maybe a year. Okay, but anyway, it was definitely a long time process in finding out information. So notice this field is a pale green, and the fields around us, this one, and this one, is a bright lime green. This is what we call improved pasture. It's being ploughed up, reseeded, and then nitrates added, which is what you have to do really to get enough pasture to fatten up sheep in, in the Snowdonia foothills. It's not the most productive land in the world, but that's, again, it's sort of represented the kind of farming and the kind of land management that we thought perhaps we wanted to move away from. This was a really big part of the journey, and I don't know exactly what the lesson is, but it's about how you find like-minded people. So the first thing that happened was, it was me and a friend. We talked to lots of different people, but when we came to Wales, it all felt more possible. And we met another friend, his name was Chris, and his father had just passed away, and he'd inherited some money, sold the house or something, and he felt a little bit beholden. This money didn't really feel like it was his, and his father was a big fan of trade unions and co-ops and stuff, and he felt it would have been a good thing for him to be part of the project. And he came up to us and said, yeah, I can commit to your project. I want to help you make it happen. I'm prepared to invest some of my money as loan stock into your project, and I'm keen on living there. So that was the magic moment when I felt it was born, and that was when it became 3 people. That's another reason why I'm interested in the numerology of 39, but it's somehow 3 is the building block of a system, isn't it? A triangle, it's very strong, integral. It's the unit it's the smallest unit that's now a building block, if you like. I felt how 3 becomes 9. Again, something I was really interested in, the idea of 3 squared. How do we create growth? How do we move towards long-term goals? A more harmonious relationship with each other, with the world, and everything. So really, I think it was born at that point. Now, interesting enough, later on down the line, Chris stepped back. He didn't end up living there, but he did invest in us, and maybe it was quite another 10 years before we paid him back. So that person, that third person that came and joined our vision, was the building block that made it happen. Also, I felt that, again, in retrospect, I had nothing to compare it to because I've never done it before, but if you come together as a large group and then you try and find consensus about values and rules and ethics, it's actually quite difficult, because then in your choices, you might be actively excluding some people. Simplistically, so we come together as a group, we've got a vision, we want to do permaculture, we want to save the world, and then someone says, but I want our community to be vegan, and it's like, well, I'm not a vegan. So what are you saying? I can't be in your community. I'm not good enough. Are you going to throw me out? What's going on? That could lead to upset, conflict. A better way would be to have made that decision first. To say, we're starting a community that is vegan. Would you like to join? You go, actually, no, I wouldn't, because I'm not a vegan, but good luck. Maybe that's not the best example, but I'm just giving it an example, right? It's something. Or it could be smoking or dogs or I don't know, whatever it is, but something that's fundamental that we can't have it, and now you're excluding me. So a lot of the thinking that we did to establish our co-op was done with with a small group of people. And actually, one of the other things we tried to do is, it's a strange courting process, finding potential members for your co-op, your community. It's like being at the high school, high school disco, and getting up the courage to go and ask the lass to dance with you. It's actually, do you want to be in my co-op? Like fear of rejection and all of that. So it said, what we realized we needed to do was to create a very clear vision for what we wanted, and to express that through the medium of a single leaflet, a 3-folded little leaflet. That was what we said. And we said to people, we're starting a housing co-op. If you're interested, read this. And in that, it explained what's a co-op, what's permaculture, what's consensus, what's loan stock, and and the vision of what it is that we might be trying to achieve. So with that, we recruited some members. We did a lot more thinking in the groups. We looked at lots of teamwork, group dynamic stuff, and we thought a lot about how we would manage it. And what was interesting was, so all of that was foundational work, was of immense value. But in that process, in that period, people came, they worked with us for a cycle of meetings, a few months or something, and then they maybe drift off again because they had perhaps their own vision or their own pathway that they were following or whatever. So it was kind of a coming together, almost reaching takeoff point and then falling back. Meanwhile, this place was still on the market. Months were ticking by. The vendors were getting really increasingly irate with us. If there'd been other people interested, we would have lost it. And but because it was on the margins, it was on an edge, it's way out on the far side of Snowdonia, between the mountains and the coast. It was 18 miles or something from CAT, which is whatever. It's just already seen as out being a remote place. So difficult place to find work, difficult place to establish yourself, but so much other potential. So could we see the potential? We got all the way to February 2000. February 95. And we still were sort of at the stage where the group was sort of penduluming. It was sort of coming together, and then one or two people were really interested, and then moving on. So we realized that it was going to have to take something special to create a critical mass. We were trying to get 8 people, and that's actually quite ambitious. And then, because the other thing happens is if you don't move fast enough, people who are really committed, then also they find opportunities, and so you lose them again. So edging into this February, March, whatever sort of time, I realized it was kind of now or never. And just coincidentally, happily, Centre for Alternative Technology, Peter Harper, and whoever else, Chris Whedon, decided to convene and hold a permaculture course. Peter Harper was very interested in permaculture. He's quite a critic of permaculture, but in a kind of a good way. But it was something which, I don't know, he saw as a threat. Peter Harper was the guy who coined the term alternative technology and the set of ideas that inspired the creation of the Centre for Alternative Technology. Anyway, so I went to CAT wanting to sort of convert it to permaculture. Anyway, within that course, there were 35 people on that PDC. It was incredibly powerful. We were all there every day at the centre. People went home. Some people had travelled, but most people were local. I met most of the people who became my peer group in permaculture through that course. And it was my way into CAT. So it was a very powerful experience. And at that time, we were 3 people in a proto chicken shack, and we met the other 5 all at once, all there, all at CAT. 1 or 2 of them were volunteers at CAT, and the rest were on the PDC that we did. They were prepared to relocate from other parts of UK to come and be part of it. And we found our 8. And cut a long story short is we never got to the 110,000. We managed to raise just over about 102, 103. And we went back to them and said, look, so with the costs and everything, we dropped our offer to 100,000. We said we've become aware of the state of the property. It's going to need a lot of work, and it really did need a lot of work. We dropped the offer. They weren't happy, but they took it because they needed the money. So we got what we wanted. Maybe they'd been a little bit greedy. They were trying to get a lot more than what they paid for it. And to be honest, they hadn't done that much work on it. What they'd done was a bit shoddy, and we had to undo it all ourselves. So anyway, I think we paid the right price. We got it. And suddenly we were there. And suddenly then, oh gosh, we're 8 people. We need to agree with each other. We need to find consensus. What do we do first? Oh, there's this window, and so many things needed doing. We wouldn't know where to start. The windows, the insulation, the heating, animal mess, junk, agricultural junk everywhere. Who knows? Well, where to start? We'd all just done a PDC. And it was before the internet and before all of that sort of stuff. We had I remember us all having loads of pages of notes and things, and badly photocopied things from photocopies of photocopies and stuff. So we had kind of a brainstorm where we tried to capture what we had remembered from the PDC, the core ideas of what we'd remembered. And we remembered it was about observation. The permaculture began with observation, protracted, and also this was before David Holmgren's 12 Principles had been published. So, and I think that's why I'm such a big fan of David's work, because he's made it really tighter and more memorable, where we had the sort of more of a ragtag of ideas, a sort of bag of ideas, of box of tricks kind of thing, of Bill Mollison-isms. Permaculture's come a long way since it started. It really has, and it was good at the beginning, but it's only getting better, you know. Protracted and thoughtful observation. Protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor. We remembered that work was a symptom of bad design. We've been told that on the PDC. So if you feel it's feeling like hard work, go back to the drawing board. So that was kind of encouraging. We were reminded that our first set of activities, the first priorities as we arrived in this kind of derelict, kind of slightly run down place. Oh, this isn't very good. I've got better pictures. Never mind. I've got so many versions of my slideshows. This one hasn't got all the pictures in. Never mind. Protracted thoughtful observation rather than protracted thoughtless labor. Work is to be avoided. Your first job is to observe, and it takes a year to really understand something. You've got to see it in its seasons, see it at the hottest and the driest and the wettest and the coldest. But to remember that we're surrounded by loads of opportunities, insurmountable opportunity. So it's actually our chance is to choose of which of those opportunities we're going to focus on. So rather than feeling overwhelmed by all the jobs you have to do, it's more like narrowing your focus to what's going to be the thing that's most empowering. Let's do that first. But let's remind ourselves that we've got to take time to observe. So that really took the pressure off. And we know that, catch and store energy, that we're trying to hold on to water and fertility and hold it high in the landscape. So we remembered that from our PDC, and so we started making compost. We thought, well, we don't know what else to do. We can compost everything that's in the place, and we haven't decided how we're going to use the compost. We haven't decided where the garden's going to go, but we know we're going to use it. And the sheds were all full of years and years of old, chicken manure and cow muck and stuff like that. So there was a lot of bracken as well. We harvested all the bracken. It gave us something to do that was team building. It gave us something to do that was active. We weren't in any way making permanent changes. We were catching and storing energy, not just the energy of the compost, but the energy, if you like, of the group and of the knowledge of getting to know the place by working on it. So that made a lot of sense, actually. Other things we remembered from our design course was we were trying to make the minimum input for the maximum output. That in a mature system, the maintenance just becomes harvesting. We were moving from patterns to detail. We were really motivated by the think globally, act locally kind of maxim. And we wanted to grow our own food, but we didn't want to be self-sufficient. We wanted to try because we knew we couldn't be. We wanted to cooperate with neighbors. We were interested in community efficiency, not self-sufficiency. And we thought about the multiple functions, multiple elements thing. Again, it's that this is what we'd retained from the PDC process. So this was the base map that the estate agents gave us. It's incredible how not very accurate they are, and how I guess things have come a long way in a short time. But here's the place. This is the farmhouse. That's the stable. That's the what had been a cow shed, and had been kind of converted into, say, holiday accommodation. This barn had been sold off with this field to the farmer who had the land around. So we'd lost that. This shed was ours, and we had the land around the house. This is what we call our sort of meadow field and the wetland field. We remembered a thought, an idea that I think had been discussed on IPDC, which was something that James Lovelock had said, the originator of the Gaia hypothesis, was that to live on this earth in harmony with nature and with ourselves, we can give up 1/3 of the space of the land to sensitive, low impact human settlement that is in harmony with nature, but the primary function of the space is human settlement. So we saw that 1/3 of the land as being within that brief. The next thing that we saw was 1/3 of the land from Lovelock Street can be for cultivation, for food and other natural products for society. But again, that has to be done in a way in which is regenerative, is harmonizing with nature, and is good for long-term ecological value. And that 1/3 of the planet and of space should just be given up for Gaia. It should just be allowed to be wild, to be natural habitat, random associations, zone 5, maybe a little bit of zone 4. So we kind of saw the function of this field as wilderness, but with zone 4 edge aspects to it. So our idea was to, where the previous owners had tried to drain the wetland to make it into a more pasture field so we could have more sheep, we thought, well, wetlands are the rarest habitat now. We need to enhance that and make it wetter, not drier. Let's put a pond in. Let's excavate it a bit. Let's actually raise the water table in the field slightly, where they put a land drain in. They put a land drain, and this line actually represents a land drain coming out and going down the side of the drive steeply up. If you go back to the original picture, it's all in a bowl. You can see we're surrounded by land, and where I'm taking a photo from, it's all higher. And so any water falling into the space here congregates in the wetland. And what they've done was they created a drain which went down here, underground here, to encourage it to drain, and then it goes down the hill. So we thought, well, let's try and retain some of that moisture and allow for a bit more diversity. So there we go, 1/3 for people, 1/3 for productivity, 1/3 for nature, but all done in a way that is super, whatever, permaculture, eco-friendly. So our original design was to around those functions. So here's our zone 1, zone 2 space. Zone 1 was obviously the private living spaces with the apartments and flats within the buildings themselves. Zone 2, this lovely yard in front of the house, would be our community space. Community space. When you step out of your house, you're now into a space where you can interact with your neighbours. What we realised that we wanted to soften the yard. Go back to the original picture. You can't see it there. I haven't got all the photos in here. Sorry. It was just like a mudslide, from cows and tractors and things. So we agreed to give up a little bit of wildlife airspace as a car park, so that the yard wasn't always full of cars. So that we had then a lovely contained zone 2 space where we as a community could interact with each other. And what had been just an old agricultural shed, a bit ugly, is eventually that became a place where community functions happened. Like we put heating system in there that heated all the buildings. We put the washing machines in there, a play space, a communal eating space or something, so that we created a space for community functions here. We've got our private houses here. We discovered very quickly it's because there were no doors going out the back of the house. You couldn't get this way. But even though this is very close to the house, this bit of woodland it really became a zone 5 area, because we really didn't go there, didn't really interact with it. We noticed it because we were from the sea, we're close to the sea. There was a lot of winds came from the west, and the site was very wind affected. However, because this hill up here was slightly higher and it was wooded, the wind would lift over the house and it wouldn't be windy so much in the yard, but across this field here it was very windy. We had lots of westerlies coming from different directions, buffeted. There's our zone 2. Our zone 3, which is productivity, world of work, kind of as we get now entered into this field, is on the zone 2, zone 3 edge is where we had this represents the gardens. intensive veg growing. So, and then we decided also the decision we made was to keep the meadow as a meadow, keep it open. We didn't want to have it all for intensive production because we wanted to do other things in it, including having permaculture courses, camps, events, celebrations, volunteers, you know, that kind of thing. And parties was very important for us. And so this was the function of the Zone 3 area. So this is sort of Zone 2, Zone 3 edge was where we're going to grow our veg. This is the most fertile land that's in the sunny sector that's close to the building. It made sense to put it there. Previously, it'd been over here where it's not so sunny and it's not as accessible for the rest of the building, rest of the inhabitants. And the wetland, we excavated a pond, we raised the water table, and as you can see, it's this green blobs around the end. We planted 2,000 native trees all around the periphery of the project, of the land. And we also created windbreak and shelter baits around the growing area. In the year 2, I remember I was growing some courgette plants in this area here in the field. I came out one morning and the plants were hanging on the barbed wire fence over here. They'd literally been blown out of the ground. We put polytunnel in, and within a couple of years that had blown away too. So we kind of realized that we needed to get allow the shelter belts to establish first before we did the other things. Getting all these trees planted, again, we were just overwhelmed with what to do about the buildings. So in the first 2 or 3 years, we focused a lot on the land. We made a lot of compost. We identified where the growing systems were going to be, and we planted, say, 2,000 trees. 3,000 was a lot. But we knew that we'd set something in motion, and we'd made a mark. And we spent a lot of time as a group going through our sort of group forming processes. There we go. There's 13 years later. So that's sort of bare canvas. That was the vision. And that's actually what we managed to achieve. So again, in that time, the farmer had extended these buildings extended that one and this one and brought these 2 in. So now he had his working farmyard. And we had one neighbor, so you can see him going all the way around us. But we've managed to really thicken and extend this forest above us, which gives us the shelter from the west. Here's all of our thickenings and plantings we put around the edges. Again, providing wind shelter, privacy, wildlife corridors. We really thought about how our creatures can cross the land. Especially when you see it's more like an island because it's surrounded by sheep desert. So we wanted to be able to create something that there's roots through it this way, all the way around for wildlife and biodiversity. There's our pond. So human settlement packed into this area. Here's our productive veg growing areas. Here's our play space. And interestingly enough, I bought this photo off the internet. It was before Google Earth and Google Maps and stuff. So, and they'd done a flyover and, you know, whatever, taking photos, you could buy it. So I bought this. And what was just so interesting was in 2008, I bought this image, and the day that they'd overflown us and photographed us, which must have been in May or June of 2008, is you see these little structures in our field is tents. That's from one of our early PDCs. So you can kind of see how it was working. There's accommodation, camping accommodation for guests in a lovely paddock, which is part of our income generation, if you like. To get there, you can see their footpaths. They're walking either this way through this path or through the veg garden. So they're passing through there. We were doing teaching in the buildings in the courtyard. Lovely. There's our permaculture design that collaboratively evolved over 13 years whilst I was there. I moved away in 2008, eventually after being there for 13 years. Once you've got the main things in the right place, like there's only the windbreaks in the right place, the paths, access, the pond, then you can add layers and layers of detail. What was really interesting is going back and visiting since. to see how people use the space after I've gone, after the rationale for why we put things in certain places is less understood, is if something's functional, if something is the right thing in the right place, people just treat it like it's always been there. And that's really interesting. So, and I know that because we did a sort of sector analysis, thought about, you know, here's the sun coming around, this is the sunniest part of the land, the best soil, makes every sense that that's going to be the area that you cultivate. We've got our polytunnel. Now, our first polytunnel blew away. Second polytunnel lasted much, much longer. And the third one lasted even longer again, because by that time, all of these trees had become established. We actually put a food forest in this side. And we cut and laid this hedge to make it a better windbreak. And so once all those things are established, then everything else started settling in place. So again, it's about permaculture, it's about sequence, it's about having a bit of patience and knowing that if you get things in the right place, they just become self-reinforcing. So here's us then considering different areas in greater detail as a vision, as a concept map. Again, looking at different areas of the land and seeing now the potentials as we moved into it through, say, our courses and different programs. Here's our veg garden establishing. Windbreak, the willow around the back as again, shelter belt. I put then a layer of fruit trees on the inside of that and vines and raspberries. So we've got a really, really thick, dense shelter belt, but it's not shading out the garden at all in any way. I put elements within the garden like stone walls, again, to give it structure and shape, a thermal mass for heat stores, and habitat for, you know, for smaller vertebrates and invertebrates. Slowly, in the early years, we made a mistake of trying to be over ambitious, and we tore up the whole corner of the field with a plow, and imagine we were going to grow many more veg than we actually were able to sustain. Because again, in as early 2 or 3 years, we all had a lot of spare time, a lot of energy for the project. As time went on, people started having babies, getting jobs, and, you know, having other priorities, and that's the reality. So I decided to rezone it a bit, again with the students to help. And I thought, this half of the garden I'm going to make forest garden, food forest, and this half will be the intensive. So, and we could always sort of modify that later. So as we added more detail and more productivity into the sort of the zone 2 garden, if you like, and we allowed more of a zone 4 garden to appear next to it. And at the time, that was when I was working on the risk roof garden project, and I was really, really into food forests and learning a lot. So I had access to a lot of plants, and slowly establishing this area. So that was, for me, that was really fun as well. A chance to diversify and apply what I'd learned, seeing the different yields. Over the course of the years, we replaced every single window in the building. We did energy audits on it. We got solar water heating put in. We got biomass heating system worked out. This is starting to host more permaculture courses, bringing more people onto the site to extend our knowledge and build to the foundation that was there already. This is Chris Dixon. He's one of my real permaculture teachers and mentors. And behind him is Chris Evans and Luby McNamara. Chris Evans is Nepal permaculture, really. He's done a lot of international work. I go to training sessions with him, and he talks about permaculture, international development. He now lives in Herefordshire, and his wife, Luby, writes books about people in permaculture and that side of things. So those are the people who taught me how to teach the PDC, my mentors, and hosting and running PDCs and working alongside people like that is how I got to get my diploma and become a teacher of my own. And how wonderful to be sat in a yurt in your own field learning about the processes going on around you. And we made lots, not mistakes, but we did lots of things in a hurry, and we didn't fully understand and what have you. And we had a chance to go back and correct that, build on that, and you know, and it's understand it's a learning and reflective process. So look, from here to here, that's the journey. There was so much detail in that. I'm going to post a video actually on the page. I've done a retrospective of the early years, and I've done a little narrative, so I'll put that on if you are interested. But really, it's the journey that we went on, and look, see how this is the design, how it's evolved, how it's from this bare windswept place to a place that really protected with wind shelter. That we tried to open up passive solar again, heating the house, heating spaces, obviously for growing. It's not solid forest. It looks like we've turned it all into a forest, and we haven't. It's just the edges. It's outside, but you're seeing these edges much more established. They've really grown now. It's amazing actually to see what it looks like now. And we went back I took a PDC back there in 2015, and again, seeing from this kind of really basically sort of done works that have been done on there. We've now went back and we've replaced all the windows. We've put porch over each front door. So pushing the outside away, creating edge spaces a little bit warmer, you know, keeping the damp out, stopping the things blowing in. We've softened, look, this used to be a mudslide. We've created grass, we've softened the edges. We've made a space that's nice to congregate in. It's lovely to play in here, have with kids, or we've had parties and bands over the years. 4 kilowatts, I think that's 4 kilowatts of PV gone in on the roof there. So again, diversifying how it all works. Anyway, I don't know, that's the chicken shack story up until 5 years ago, and it still goes on, and they're still facing all sorts of challenges as they grow and they develop, and their populations come and go, and they're still confronted with the challenge of the fact that they're in a remote place, and that limits the earning capacity of people. Either they have to spend time away working, which is what I had to do at one point, or they spend more time there, but they don't have a lot of money. I'm now thinking more about how I reconnect back with it. But when I left, one of the things that I really had to do was to let go and not to stay too close, because it's kind of my baby. And what I saw that I could be quite damaging or controlling it with the best will in the world, if I'm trying to manipulate things and keep things from a distance. So for the first few years I moved away, I really kept away, and I've been back a few times since. I do check in with the people who live there and make sure things are okay, which they kind of are. But everything's always ongoing, and it's never, no job's ever finished. I'd be heartbreaking if it was finished or folded, but I'd have to accept that maybe it had fulfilled its job and it's time to move on. But anyway, yep. So it was 10 years into this project, really, when people started asking me about sharing the learning of that journey, that I realized that I was ready to start teaching on permaculture courses, rather than perhaps just convening or helping with practicals or doing the cooking or whatever it was I was doing. And what I found was I only really felt comfortable teaching directly from my own experience or my own observations. I found that really easy. As soon as I'm trying to explain things that aren't really of my experience, that, you know, in Bill's book or something, I found myself really struggling with that. So that's another way for you to think about it, is and again, another yield from your own knowledge and experience is how you can bring that into teaching and education and stuff. So yeah, okay, good. Okay, a couple more things in the people and permaculture lecture that I hadn't quite finished. I wanted to bring out the story of the Chicken Shack, to understand I'm not just talking in a theoretical way. This is what enabled me to, us as a group, to actually go ahead and achieve something that was a big, ambitious, long-term project that was transformational for everyone that was involved, and that has survived. Now, next year will be an interesting milestone, because as the sort of founder member and longest serving member, next year the co-op will have operated for longer without me than with me at some point. I think after August next year or something, that will happen. So I think that's an interesting mark of time for a growing up of a project as well, and hopefully, you know, it will carry on. But that's. And here's another thing: this is another massive difference between going down that co-op route and buying your own house. Firstly, as an individual, you go to a bank and say, I want to buy a house. They're going to ask to see your wage slips. Do you have permanent employment? And if you don't, they're very, very reluctant to lend money to you, especially since 2008. And I am self-employed, so that was always going to be challenging for me. And so again, being in co-ops has enabled me to continue down working in the environment sector, working in maybe for short-term contracts on projects, and being more self-employed and things like that. Whereas I probably wouldn't have been able to do these things had I just had a regular job, or not done a co-op rather. So the next thing is there's a difference in a housing co-op, and this was a big thing then. I think now it's changed because housing benefit has changed. But as a tenant in a housing co-op, if I'm on low income, I can get housing benefit. So, and we deliberately set the rent at the beginning of Chicken Shack to be what the housing benefit people would be prepared to pay. That's why we knew we needed 8 people, because 8 times £32 a week, which is what it was back then, was enough to service the borrowings of the £102,000 which cost us to buy the property, plus the rates and the insurance and the other things that you have to pay, council tax. So that safety net of, well, if things don't quite work out, I've got housing benefit, and that housing benefit at least pays my minimum to be able to keep my accommodation. That safety net allowed me to take chances, basically, and to Sector 39 wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for that, really. I would have had to have stayed much closer to more traditional ways of making the living. So there's many advantages to this, and it depends what you want to do. And so it's not like I'm saying this is the only way to do things. It really isn't. There's many ways to do this, but this suited us at the time, and I hope it's created then a sort of chain of opportunities which have been there for future people since. And all of that, I think, is part of the yield. So the another difference, key difference, is if I were to suddenly decide that I wanted to go back, and I've had enough fun doing this work, or being in Fan Rider, or being at Dragons, the opportunity is still there, isn't it? I can go back and reapply to join, and if the space is available, it's still only £50 a week to live there. So it's great. I mean, and that's somehow, if you had a house and you sold it, you don't really get a chance to move back in afterwards. And even if you get a chance perhaps to buy it again, but it won't have been evolved and developed in line with your vision necessarily. Whereas Chicken Shack has stayed within sort of the value set that we gave it, and long may it do so. I think that's really, really important. So somewhere along the line, doing a PDC changed my life, and it changed it for lots of reasons. I'd already got involved in permaculture in Africa, as I'd said, but coming back and being here, well, it's Lindsay that's dropping out today, and Michelle, not you. Anyway, coming back and doing a PDC brought me into this PDC community, and it enabled permaculture, Chicken Shack to happen. Very early on within Chicken Shack, we actually started working for the Permaculture Association and doing their office and working for the charity that underpins permaculture education in Britain. And so that then brought us very close to that world too. And in the first couple of years, 96 and 97, we hosted permaculture courses at Chicken Shack, run by other teachers, because obviously we were just novices, we were new, but it gave us a chance to take part. And in the process that we could facilitate by creating the space for learning to happen in, even though I didn't feel I had much to offer. The one thing that I did know about was how to set up a housing co-op. So because that's what we'd just done. And sometimes when you've just done something, that knowledge is very fresh in your mind. It's very current. So even on those early PDCs, even though we were just very much at the beginning of our learning pathways, we all felt we had a lot to offer. And so we facilitated and hosted those PDCs. So if you like, we took responsibility for the process, not so much the content, because we were still learning. We were still learning how to communicate. First, you had to communicate those ideas, but also building up the experience so that we're talking about our own, talking from first-hand experience, not from book knowledge. Permaculture's so much more about doing it than talking about it. So somewhere, I thought I liked this diagram again. I can't tell you where I got it from. I can't remember. But I just grabbed it. I liked it. And I just thought in terms of education, there's these sort of two different polarities or whatever between the content and the process. And maybe as we become more experienced, we might move somehow from facilitator to coach, maybe to an expert. I don't know if I consider myself an expert in anything, but I certainly have a lot of knowledge to draw on. And actually reflecting on and teaching on that is really what helps cement it and develop it in your own mind too. So I'm very interested in that. As we've gone down into it, we've diversified more and more in what we've done. I don't know, we've done, I don't really know how that slide fits into the flow, but there it is. That's just off a PDC. We did a wonderful fermentation workshop, and from that was like a jumping off point actually to think about a lot of other things. This was a new element. We'd not incorporated it into a course before, and we suddenly realized that there's so many layers to this. You could develop an interest or expertise in a very narrow area, get really, really good at it. And then that can then sit into a bigger, wider learning experience. So think about what you've got, Sean. You've got all these individual skills. Same with you, Michelle. Say you've got, about growing or about fermenting, whatever. But how that in a learning environment, there's things that you could very much contribute, but then perhaps there's other areas where you could just help with the process. And this is what we learned really from hosting PDCs early on at Chicken Shack, and then later on in my life beyond that, since that. But that there's so many different yields, there's so much benefit that comes from it, basically. So this is a couple of brainstorming models. I'm going to look at this group work thing as a good way to spend the last little bit of this lecture, and I'm going to have a bit of a chat. Tools, roles, and strategies for effective group work. Okay, integrate rather than segregate. How do we work better together as teams of people? It's kind of everything. And also it's sometimes when you reach an impasse where you get some kind of a conflict or a falling out, something it's very, very difficult to build it back again. And one of the ways to do it is to bring help in from the outside, which is another good thing about integration, is to be part of networks. And co-ops have networks. It's usually possible to find people within those networks who can help you, experienced facilitators who can hold a space and allow the right things to happen within it. One of the things that we learned again at Chicken Shack over the years, because we definitely had some ups and downs in the years, was that if we ever kind of broke our own rules, or our own system started to be a little bit inadequate, let's say we weren't being effective, the best thing that we could do was to invite an external facilitator or chair to come and chair our meetings. And because that makes everyone behave, and it makes you have proper formal meetings. And we worked very hard in the early years at Chicken Shack to have effective meetings. If you're saying the only way you make a decision, the way that you operate your operating system, how you decide things as a group, is by having meetings. So if those meetings are ineffective, or they start malfunctioning, people start shouting and being disrespectful, and people don't get listened to, that's a problem. And if you can't resolve that quite quickly, it can spiral out, because then you lose your operating system, and then you're down to being ruled by personality and by bullying, and that's when groups fail. And it happens, and you can go for years of things going really well, and then somehow something makes it go off the rails. So you have to pay attention to this. For me, it's a big deal. So one of the ways that we do it is by having really a set of strategies, a bag of tricks that we can dip into to make sure that we're having effective meetings. If we don't have effective meetings, we might have to go right back to the drawing board and have a process to discuss about how we reach, about what is our operating system, which maybe goes back to that consensus building process that I showed you earlier on. We have to agree about how we're going to agree. It might be, there's this little thing at the bottom here about grounding principles, to have guidelines, not rules, try to avoid rules, to have guidelines that the group buys into. And if those have kind of been lost, then it's good to be specific about them. And we might create a list of grounding principles. That's what this is. We might create a group mandala. We might write down what our grounding principles are. We might stick them on the wall to remind us. It depends on the degree of dysfunctionality of the group, doesn't it? It depends how far it's gone. Now, you might, especially if, I do sometimes get invited in to go and work with other groups who have become a bit dysfunctional. That's difficult too. So the way to do that would be, I'm going to give you a big load of grounding principles that would be our guidelines for how we proceed. I'm going to go through that, and thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I'll get to that. Grounding principles in the group quite often are: try to avoid to be defensive, to come with expectations, to give excuses or justifications. So again, very simply is, at a meeting, we might say, Michelle, you agreed to speak to the builders to get a quote for the new window. Did you manage to do that? You might just say, sorry, I wasn't able to do that. You don't necessarily need to say, look, my mother was sick and I had to take the cat to the vet, and and I got a sore finger and my phone had broken. It doesn't matter. Michelle, will you be able to do that in time for next meeting, or shall we ask someone else to do that? That's actually, in the meeting, is the only thing that matters, is that information. You don't necessarily, you don't need to actually sort of defend yourself or to give excuses, because if we're empathetic and supportive, we wouldn't be critical anyway. Everyone in a group should have an equal opportunity to speak. I think that's a very, very important one. But we also have the right not to speak. We do this thing sometimes called, in a group, called a go-round, don't we? Take turns. Sometimes we might have talked about an issue. Let's just share what we think about this. Michelle, you go first. And then you might, and then Sean, and then Lindsay, and we go around and we say a thing. Well, it might just come when I say, oh, Michelle, you go first. Suddenly your mind goes blank. Oh, can't think of what to say. Or maybe someone just said the thing that you wanted to say and whatever. So you can just say pass, and that's fine. And then everyone else speaks if I'm the facilitator, and at the end I might say, oh, okay, Michelle, would you now like to add something? And you might say yes, and you might say no. But that's what we mean by the right not to speak. Try and look to people's strengths. Listen to the person speaking. Make I statements. Own what you're saying. I think this. Not everybody thinks this. They think this. They won't allow that. Take ownership of what you're saying. Again, these are the guidelines that you might choose to define how you have your meetings. Ands are better than buts. Keep it positive. Respect. Avoid cliques. Confidentiality. Avoid judgment. Don't hog time. I think rescuing means you're trying to explain something, and I'll say, oh, I think what Michelle is trying to say is this. And in some ways taking the words out of your mouth. Allow people, even if they're struggling to articulate what they're saying, allow them a bit of space rather than try to say it for them. Avoid interrupting. Rescuing can be a form of interrupting. Have empathy. That goes back to keeping it positive. Smile. Avoid put downs of ourselves and others, because that's another kind of controlling thing that people do in groups is, oh, you don't want to hear my viewpoint. Oh, you wouldn't want me on your team. Oh, I'm just going to let everybody down. And then you're almost inviting people to say, oh, yes, we do want you. And I've come across one or two people do that terribly, and that used to really bug me. Volunteer ourselves only. No, it's fine. Sean, you'll do that, won't you, Sean? That's okay. That's potentially annoying. Acknowledge and value everyone's opinion and be aware of the environment. Okay, so those are some suggestions of guiding principles for meetings. Maybe individually, one or two of those might resonate with us really strongly. So maybe I'm going to bring that into our founding principles of this group. I really won't want to be in a judging environment. I know I'm not perfect. I don't need you to point that out. I want to be in a supportive environment. That's my thing. I need that. Okay, let's put that on our group mandala. If it helps, we'll stick it on the wall, or we'll represent that in some way by having, I don't know, whatever, an item there that helps us think of that. So we need to have guiding principles and guidelines, how we want to operate as a group. I don't want people shouting at me. I really don't like conflict. Conflict really upsets me personally, and it takes me a long time to get over it. So I'd rather not. I accept if I've made a mistake, fine, no problem. We'll fix it, but doesn't you don't have to get nasty about it. So we've got our guiding principles of how we might be as a group. Then let's think about the roles that we might take within a group. We've already talked about our 6 hats. So understand that there's creating roles, there's amplifying creativity roles, and then there's critiquing roles, and then also recording and measuring roles. Those are all valuable, and they're all equally important. We all have the opportunity to play all 6 of those hat roles. So we might come up with group techniques that allow us to all focus in a positive way or in a critiquing way. The rules for good meetings and good group work are this. A meeting needs a facilitator. Sometimes we call it a chairperson, chairman, chairman, facilitator, chair, whatever. Chair facilitator is good, but that's what. Anyway, the rules of the facilitator are quite simple. That they need to be neutral to the issues that are being discussed. They need to make sure that the group stick to the agenda and to the grounding principles. So at a meeting, we have an agenda that is decided before the meeting. You don't write it at the meeting or during the meeting. Oh, there are a few things we forgot. Those are any other business. A good facilitator will have prepared the agenda. We'll look at it and say, we've allowed 1 hour for this meeting. We have 6 items on the agenda. I'm going to allow 10 minutes. No, as I say, we've got 6 items on the agenda. Yeah, I'm going to allow 10 minutes per item. That's that hour. If we can't reach consensus in 10 minutes on each issue, we're not ready to decide on that issue, and we'll need to think about it some more. At meetings, we discuss proposals, not ideas. So if it's like, well, what are we going to do about the garden, guys? I don't know. Those are the kind of meetings that go on forever. What we need is a proposal that says, I propose we buy a polytunnel for £364, that we put it here on the map that I've drawn, and that Dave and Sue are in charge of installing it, and it'll happen next week. Then we can discuss that and go, do we have £365? Is that really the right place to put the polytunnel? Why is it that Dave and Sue are doing it when I wanted to do it? We can discuss those things. But those are all smart, specific, measurable objectives. And if we could just, Dave and Sue and Steve can do it. Okay, now I feel included, I'm happy, I remove my objection, let's get on and do that thing. And we decide it quite quickly. If we're still talking about it after 10 minutes, and it's like, why do we need a polytunnel? Well, I'd rather spend the money on something else. You're not ready to make that decision yet. And you're not going to make it at a meeting, because those people who are not agreeing or aren't on the same page, they need to go and spend some time together. Maybe it doesn't involve the whole co-op sitting around a table or whatever to have that little side discussion. So you guys go away and talk about that. You sort out your issue and bring it back to the next meeting in a new proposal that we can discuss. So we need something specific to talk about, not just some open-ended thing. And that's why, again, rule of thumb is if you're making decisions through meetings, and when you hear that there's a meeting coming up and your heart sinks and you think, oh my God, I don't want to have another one of those bloody meetings, alarm bells should go off. Really, you need to make changes so that you don't think like that. You need better decision-making processes. You need to have more effective meetings. Otherwise, you will fail again. So the facilitator has a very clear role. If the facilitator is really attached to the issue, then it's not always the best way to do it, because they might inadvertently be steering or pushing for certain things. Again, when on 2 or 3 occasions over the years, I was at Chicken Shack, we invited in a friend from another co-op to chair our meetings, and that really, really helped to facilitate the meeting. And there's a couple of things here is that relate very much to the facilitator, is that the meeting needs to have clear aims and objectives, and it has to have an agenda. So people know what the meeting's for, why we're having it, and when it begins, where it is, and when it ends. Because we all have other responsibilities. And so it's not fair to people to say, well, we'll start at 8, see how we feel at 9:30, and we'll maybe push on if we're nearly the end. No, don't do that. Choose a time, stick to it. If you and throw the proposals aren't ready to activate on, come back to them, work on them, allow them to germinate, and allow it some time. Second role in a group is the minute taker, and you need to record action points. Michelle said she'd get a quote from the builder. There's an action point to get for a new window or whatever. Okay, write that down. And decisions. We said we could spend £450. Michelle, that's your budget. There's a decision. Put that right down. Everybody knows what we're doing. At the next meeting, if you didn't get a chance to do that, you don't need to apologize to us. We just say, are you able to do it next week? Or if not, maybe Sean could do it. Pass it on. Simple decision making. Now, there's lots of other roles that we might play within the group. That might be us with other hats on, or it might be other individuals. But understand that everybody needs to contribute in their own way and represent their own potential abilities. So there might be task groups. So again, it's within our meeting, we might decide, okay, we're going to invest some time and energy into our garden, but we don't necessarily need to talk about that at a management meeting, because that might be a task-orientated group that's about gardening. And maybe we could set a cluster of our members or stakeholders who are particularly interested in the garden. Like, I'm not really bothered what you do in the garden, as long as there's food, and I'm happy to help if you tell me, but I'm not going to be the person making the decisions. We can have a task-oriented process. And look, we've got other people whose job might be a spokesperson to communicate ideas, or making the strategy decisions, creating new visions. We can all contribute in many different ways. So we've got here in our little bubbles just a few techniques that we might use in decision making, in group making, group work to be more effective. This idea of, we need clear aims, objectives, and agenda. This group shrine thing is a bit the same as the mandala is. You either write your guiding principles down or you bring elements which help communicate that. So you might stick a Buddha on your day table to help everybody remember to be serene and thoughtful or something like that. Whatever works for you is basically what I'm saying, but it's important. So PMI is a brainstorming model, plus minus interesting. I skipped over it just for time, but let's just say it's like 6 hats, plus, minus, and interesting. So when we might be investigating an idea, okay, let's spend 20 minutes investigating the pluses and minuses of investing in our garden. The positives are this, the negatives are this. What we get for the interesting is obviously is the kind of the issues that are raised by looking at it in that way. So it's kind of a 6 hat thinking team way, type tool, very useful way to unpack an issue. So again, is everybody can feel that they've been heard, which is so important. Especially in larger groups, when we're reaching consensus, it can be good to, sometimes people use hand signals. So if I'm making a point and you agree with me, you can just do that. And then if everybody's doing that, I realize I don't need to make that point. We could save time, move on, everyone agrees. You know that thing when you're in a meeting and there's a facilitator, and the facilitator is quite a good facilitator and they can see, oh, look, I'm speaking. Michelle's got her hand up. I can see Sean wants to say something as well. So the facilitator, rather than you need to be there with your hand up, you might say, okay, Michelle, you're next. And Sean, I see you want to make a point. So there we got a cue. But actually, Sean doesn't want to wait till make his point because he's actually got a question. He just didn't understand what it was that I had said. So he doesn't want to have to wait till after Michelle speaks and then to come back with a question of like, what did that actually mean? So you can do this as a hand signal. It's a technical point. I'm not waiting for my turn to speak. I just want to know, can you just tell me what that term you used meant? So then you can break the sequence. That's a very useful one. There's many. Another hand signal gets used in group work. They do this a lot in Extinction Rebellion, actually. So you've got a big group of people and there's a lot of noise and you're trying to get attention so that you can focus the meeting. Blue hat person wants attention. I'm holding the space. I could, shut up, everyone! Try and, put my voice above you, or I can put my hands up in the air. And what happens is, if someone else notices, oh, look, he's got his hands in the air, that means shut up. And then anyone else who sees that signal, they also put their hands up and everybody goes quiet. So the whole room goes quiet. There's 2 people at the back still talking. And then they suddenly realize, and no one had to shout, shut up. So it's horses for courses, guys. It's what works for you. I'm not saying you have to do hand signals. Some people don't like them. In bigger groups, it can be a very, very good tool quickly to reach an agreement, to keep the flow of a conversation going, avoid some of the screaming and shouting. There's lots of different ones. I only know a few. Big groups often mean that certain quiet voices don't get heard. And something which we saying that in permaculture is you need to hear all the voices, and that sometimes it's the quiet one at the back that holds the missing piece of the jigsaw. One way that you can do that is, it's a bit intimidating to speak out in a big group. People like me with loud voices don't really have a problem. People like my lovely volunteer John in Liverpool, he would never say boo to a goose, Get people into a small group and create a less intimidating environment for individual ideas to come out. Maybe the person who's sitting, one of the people in that group might be the scribe. They might write down the outputs of that group and then help convey those ideas back to the main group. Because again, we want to make sure that we all hear those contributions. A very good technique in getting to know, again, with a big group, sometimes I do this, is I tell, it's called a 2x2 or a 2+2, or a talk and listen, is another term for that, is I say to you, go and sit together with someone that you haven't spoken to yet and spend 2 minutes talking to them about why you're here, what your name is, and a little bit of background about yourself. And then they're going to spend 2 minutes talking to you and you're going to listen. And when we come back to the main group is you're going to introduce the person you spoke to. So again, I can say, okay, I spoke to Michelle. She told me she lives in Newtown. She's interested in horticulture. She's working at Cultivate, Pathways to Farming. Is there anything else, Michelle? Did I forget something? Then you can chip in and say, oh, you forgot to say I'm a concert pianist or something or whatever. So that's a really nice icebreaker. And one of the reasons that you might use that technique is you're actually forcing people to listen to each other, because I'm going to have to remember what you said, rather than whilst they're speaking, thinking about what I'm going to say, which is, we can all be guilty of that. So that's quite a nice technique. I like that. Silence can be good. Playing games, different games. Small groups with set time limits. There's nothing worse. I remember being at the workhouse in the early years of the workhouse, and the lovely old gentleman who was the chair of the board of directors, trustees for the charity, lovely guy, really well-meaning, very softly spoken, but just had a kind of a jumble of ideas. And he sat there, we're having a meeting, and he's speaking, he has the agenda, and he's taking minutes. We're an hour and a half into the meeting, and he's talking, rambling on about something, and he says, oh, and here's another agenda item we need to talk about. And he adds that onto the list, whilst already an hour and a half into the meeting. I have no idea how long this is going on for, and we still, the agenda items getting longer rather than shorter is. You just want to die in a circumstance. Yeah? And I also think that, hang on a minute, all we're doing is watching someone have a meeting with themselves. They're setting the agenda, they're doing the talking, and they're keeping the minutes. You don't really need us to be here. That's not a group functioning well. And so time limits is really important. Keep it. People can only concentrate for so long. It shouldn't be a battle of wits and, see who can, how can outlast who can last the longest. Anyway, there's loads and loads of techniques. There's a great book called The Zen of Groups. There's lots to know about group work and stuff like that. It's the empowering thing. If we can integrate rather than segregate, if we can build strong teams, groups, projects, co-ops, there's so much more that we can achieve. So, and the final slide I just wanted to show is a bit of fun, is, again, when we're all physically in the same space. Again, and years ago, really, we used to play a game a lot about groups and our roles in groups. And what I would do is I'd come with a big stack of newspapers and some masking tape, roll of masking tape. And each group would get a pile of newspapers, as many as they, loads, but one roll of masking tape, and that's it. And then I say to you, okay, everyone, in your teams, this game is about winning, and you have to build the tallest freestanding structure that you can using only the materials that I've given you. And you have 15 minutes, but you're not allowed to speak for the first 10 minutes. So that what happens then is everyone goes into it. How do we do it? Oh, I've got to design. I've got to work out how to build a freestanding structure out of newspaper, and we can't speak. So there's stepping stones that you have to get to, and somebody has to work out the strategy, the technique. Usually it involves rolling them into tubes. So then everybody starts rolling newspapers into tubes, and then you realize there's the narrow point, the pinch point's the tape. So one person then, without speaking, realizes, okay, I can start tearing lots of bits of tape, sticking them on the edge of a table or something. Everybody else is rolling away. Okay, that's going to work for a bit. But now, so we've got jobs, we're working as a team, but we've got to design. If you leave the design bit for the last 5 minutes, you usually don't manage to, that's not long enough. So then you've got to start gesticulating, and you're either going to build something that looks like a box girder bridge section, or you're going to build something that looks like the Eiffel Tower. That's generally what happens. And someone has to come with that decision and manage the process. So again, there's usually somebody trying to assert themselves, and other people are not enjoying that, or they're trying to assert their idea. And then you say, okay, blow your whistle. You can now talk. You've got 5 minutes left. And then the room explodes into, and then you get to the end. And quite often, the team that have gone to the most ambitious project is just a minute before the bell goes for the end. It falls over because they're trying to extend it too far. Or it's a fun thing, and obviously, it's all about deconstructing afterwards what happened and why, you know, and the roles that you took and decision making you made. But there was one time we did it when it didn't follow those patterns, and it was interesting, and I just thought it was really astute and clever. And we were in slightly different circumstances. I stopped using newspapers because we didn't really have them anymore. And we used to be loads. Everyone had a pile of newspapers, and we don't really anymore. But what I did have was A4 paper written on one side. You know, it came from a local factory. I used to get boxes of it. And it was quite good paper as well. And the other difference was, often we've done these things like in a barn at Trevlock Farm or outside or something, so wind's a factor. But this time we were in a village hall where it was a sealed building, so there wasn't any wind. And so someone came up with an idea for making the tower that didn't even need the tape. You could just do it with the paper, because the paper is a bit stronger than newspaper. And I was just used to seeing the problem in a certain way, because it always operated in the same way. But the conditions had changed, and I wasn't paying attention to that. So, and it was John, it was the night security guy from Liverpool. He came down to on his PDC, and he had a different idea from everybody else. And no one had ever done it that way. And I've been doing this course for years. And even I thought, oh God, this is a bit embarrassing. He's doing something really silly. And the other members of his course, 2 of his team, didn't really understand what he was doing. So they distanced themselves for it, because they didn't want to be part of a embarrassing failure. And the other guy did get it a bit. And anyway, so this is the picture. I just love this. Is these 2 didn't quite get it. So what he did was he just folded the papers into a concertina, and as you can see, so that they stand, and then put flat layers enough to make it strong, and then off you go with this paper tower. And so these 2 just thought he was nuts and it wasn't going to work, so they kind of distanced themselves. And this guy had finally understood what he was doing and got involved. And John just quietly known exactly what he was doing. And all they did was they folded all the concertina papers for 10 minutes, and the other group by then built an Eiffel Tower that was really tall. And then in the last 5 minutes, he just assembled it all, and it was just bang, and it was there, and he won. And just look on his faces. He's like kind of outmaneuvered everybody with his clever little design idea, and he managed to achieve it. So wonderful. So that's about the diversity of people. That's about everybody contributing, inclusive ways of doing things. As much as integrate rather than segregate is about ecosystems. That's why I showed you the wolves. As much as it's about food forests and layers and understanding how everything's connected together, I'm really interested about how we work together as people, how we operate in groups, how we make people feel empowered and included. And because those are the things ultimately could be the most empowering that we learn off this course. There you go. It's 5 minutes past 1. Sorry for going over. There we go. So I'm going to look at co-ops this evening, and you may notice to go and have a look at the resource page on the part 2. Now there's a part 2 for our Dragons PDC resource page on the site, and I've added a few more things last night. I'll add some more this afternoon. It's all there. Have a lovely afternoon. I'll see you later, and we will reconvene at 7. And interestingly enough, we're having a housing co-op meeting later today. So me and Yossi. So I'll be trying to apply what I was teaching into what we're doing. Any questions, anything? Just say yes. Hi, bye. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Sean. You're welcome.
Thank you. See you later.
Okay, see you later, Michelle, Lindsay. All right, bye-bye.